My thumbs up to go. Rob? Excellent, thank you. So we're now meeting as committee of the whole. I'll call this meeting to order. Is there any declaration of interest, pecuniary or otherwise? Seeing none, I would just say again, one comes up during the course of the meeting, I would ask you to declare it at that time. We do have a delegation scheduled for 10:30. We're 2 minutes early. How are we doing there? Should we go to the consent? Sorry? I can go. Okay, excellent. Where does, oh, at the back. Okay, I was looking. That's why I thought maybe they weren't here. Good morning. Mary Lou, are you going to be making introductions or?
Thank you, Mr. Warden. We're pleased to have Vicki Watson and Tracy Smith here today to present the 2021 audited financials. Tracy is virtual today as she wasn't feeling well. And so we'll turn it over to Tracy. Sorry, and Vicki.
Thank you very much. And yes, Tracy is not feeling very well today, so she is online virtually. Thank you very much for having BDO here this morning. If there are any questions for Tracy in regards to the audit process, please do raise hands and we can bring Tracy back up on screen to answer those questions. So today we are going to be presenting the audit final report to the committee of the whole. This package contains all our required communications to you. I'm going to move to the executive summary, which is on page 3 of this package. Normally I would be moving this through as Tracy speaks, so I'll have to sort of double task myself today. So thank you very much. So the status of the audit at this point in time is we are looking for approval of these draft financial statements by committee. We will be requiring receipt of a signed management letter dated for the report date. A copy of this letter that will be signed by management is attached in the body of this report. We will be doing our subsequent events review through to the financial statement approval date. That also includes inquiring of your legal team as to certain events that have taken place and confirming whether our disclosures are appropriate in these financial statements. As part of this executive summary, we do discuss that we are independent of the County of Grey, and details of this are included in Appendix B. In regards to the materiality, we have not changed the materiality compared to the planning report that we provided earlier this year. In regards to fraud, we did not become aware of any fraud affecting the County of Grey, but if there are any items that any members of council do wish to discuss, we ask that you contact Tracy Smith or I directly. In the remainder of the report, we discussed specific audit related matters in regards to risks that we addressed in those audit findings, significant financial statement disclosures, as well as any areas where there were significant estimates and judgments. As part of our testing, we are required to discuss with the county if there are any significant deficiencies in internal controls. We will advise at this point in time that we did not find any deficiencies in the design and implementation of any of the internal controls that we tested during the audit. We are required as well to advise if there were any unadjusted differences during the year. And as you will see on screen, there were no items that were unadjusted during the course of the audit. New this year, you will note that there are inclusions of the adjusted differences. These are normal adjustments that we do prepare on an annual basis. The exciting part, the financial results. I'm going to start with the independent auditors report. This report is similar to previous years, so there have been no changes in the content of the report. We have provided an unmodified opinion. This is the highest level of assurance that we can provide. Looking at the consolidated statement of financial position, just giving a high level review of this information. There are timing differences in regards to when cash has been received and when paid out for its intended purpose. Cash has increased just over $14 million, and deferred revenue is up nearly 12 million. So certain grants have been received in advance of being expended. That does support much of the difference in cash and investments. The overall increase in the net financial assets of just over $8 million. This is a positive position for the county to be in at this time. The capital assets shown just in the bottom part of the page there do show that the amount is similar to prior year. This results or shows the result that there has been investment in tangible capital assets during the year, similar to the recognition of the historical cost, the amortization expense during the year. So that is just one of the highlights that we wanted to bring out in regards to the statement of financial position. When we look at the statement of operations and accumulated surplus, looking at the first two columns, the budget and the actual for revenues, pretty close in regards to the budget and the actual results there. When we look at the expense line, there are some differences. A large part of this difference is that the budgeted amounts that go through council do not include the amortization. That's a separate report where there's a reconciliation of the tax budget to the actual results for the year. So that non-cash amortization part of that budget is approximately $12 million. There was also continued increases in long-term care and other departmental costs in relation to COVID response. So there were some additional costs as well continuing throughout the year. When we look at the annual surplus, which is the third line from the bottom, you will note this shows as $8.6 million. But this is before any adjustments for balance sheet items, such as purchases of capital assets, payment of your long-term debt, and any transfers anticipated to reserves. Details of these transactions are included in note 7 at the back of these financial statements. The statement of changes in net financial assets does show the adjustments for additional non-cash items, such as your change in capital assets, the prepaid expenses, and the inventory and supplies, showing details again of that positive variance in your net financial assets at the end of the year, showing that you have assets available to fund your future obligations. I won't go through the statement of cash flows for you, not as exciting. The next several pages do go through the significant accounting policies and detailed disclosures of certain items within the financial statements. I was not going to go through all those details at this time. I understand you have a very long agenda today, and I don't want to go through too much detail, but I will be available to answer any questions about the audit. But I do want to say one thing first. I want to thank Mary Lou and all her team for everything that they have done to assist us with the preparation of this financial statement audit at this point in time.
Thank you very much for that, Vicki. And I know Tracy's online as well. Is there anything Tracy will be adding, or can we go to questions? Hi, Tracy.
I'm not able to talk very well, so I'll let Vicki handle it unless there's something that I need to deal with.
Very good, thank you. Council, are there any questions? Councilor Silver.
Yes, on page 7 where you talk about the annual surplus, I see we budgeted 25.7 million and our annual surplus was only 8.6. So that's about a $17 million lower than the budget. And then when you look at acquisition of capital assets, the line below that, it's 35.3 million. And we've only added 13.1, which would seem to indicate that we spent a lot less on capital projects than we had planned, maybe because of delays or supply chain issues or whatever. But you would think that if we spent less on capital projects than we planned, $22 million less, that our surplus would be higher than planned. So those two numbers together indicate a delta of about 39 million, which is a big number. So did you have any concerns with that, or does that raise any questions?
Figured it out. I would like to direct you to page 19 of the financial statement package, which is note 7. This is a reconciliation of the budget amount. So yes, it does show that the budgeted annual surplus was just under $26 million. Of that, there were anticipated transfers to reserves to take place of just about $8.4 million and transfers from reserves of $18.5 million. Yes, there were anticipated capital acquisitions of $35 million, but as you stated, there were certain projects that were not undertaken. As well, some of the items that were considered as part of the capital budget were actually moved over to the operational budget. So part of the difference as well and the increase in operational expenses would have been considered as part of that increase on the statement of operations and not necessarily capital acquisitions, just based on the capital acquisition policy in place of the County of Grey. That reconciliation does show that the budget balance is to zero on that note.
I do not see anyone else. And if that is the case, then I will ask for a mover and seconder. Oh, apologies, I should have done that at the beginning, but I didn't. So I'm looking for a mover, moved by Councillor Boddy, seconded by Councillor Woodbury. Any further discussion? And I call the question. All those in favor? Is there anyone opposed? That is carried. Thank you. Vicky, thank you very much. And Tracy, we wish you well, speedy recovery. Thank you again. Okay. We are now going to deal with the consent agenda. Is there anything that needs to be pulled from that consent agenda? If not, then I'll ask for a mover, moved by Councillor Milne, seconded by Councillor O'Leary. The consent agenda be approved as presented. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? That too is carried. Thank you. Okay, on deck is Kim and Randy, or is it just you, Kim? Okay. We are now dealing with item 6A, updating the county strategic plan. I'm looking for a mover to put the item on the floor. Moved by Councillor Bordignon, seconded by Councillor Klumpus. Kim, you have the floor.
Thank you, and good morning, Council. Since the creation of the county's first strategic plan 10 years ago now, Grey County Council has been steadfast in its commitment to maintaining a strategic perspective to guide the operational planning and allocation of resources that allows this corporation to function effectively. Staff rely on the strategic goals as the foundation for budgeting, operational planning, and annual work plans, and our communications with the public. While we've taken a few different approaches to refreshing and reorienting the plan over the last 10 years, the result has always been a guiding document that is both sufficiently detailed and relevant to be useful for everyone who is needing to refer to it. A great deal of work has been undertaken under the direction of this council, with much more under development. And I would refer anyone to Appendix A of the report that gives a status of the initiatives that were highlighted back in 2019, the last time the plan was refreshed. And I'm really proud to say that with your support, we've been able to successfully complete many of the goals and objectives that we set for ourselves. The purpose of the report before you this morning is to get your support for a high-level strategic framework. This will provide a solid starting point from which to orient the new council and begin the process of creating a new county strategic plan. At the end of August, the senior management team as a group met to review where we are, the work that's been completed and underway, what's changing in our environment, which some days feels like everything, and what our vision was for the future, given all of that information. From those discussions, we are proposing to council to develop a new strategic plan that's based on 4 strategic themes as outlined in the report. The first of these themes is community services and people, supporting our residents in the development of healthy and vibrant communities. I see this as the heart of our organization. It includes initiatives related to housing and homelessness, healthcare, workforce development, childcare, and justice. The second theme is a new one and an important one. Recently, County Council does declare a climate emergency, and this theme highlights our work across the corporation and across the county to mitigate and adapt to fulfill our climate action plan obligations. Theme 3, I think of as our backbone: infrastructure and economy, the provision of economic development and planning services, transportation infrastructure, and technology to support residents and business success. All of these things are important foundations on which to build and undertake the other initiatives in the plan. Finally, theme 4, and we've tweak the wording a little bit here from the way that we used to refer to it. And we want to call this theme excellence in service and governance. This encompasses both our client or public facing interactions, as well as how we engage with our staff to ensure that we have a future ready organization. Doing both of these things, I feel, is fundamental to our credibility and success going forward. So with your support this morning, staff will continue to develop the 2023 operating budget. It's so important to know what those key baskets of strategic objective are. And in support of budget deliberations, a future report will discuss key performance indicators for each theme and how the proposed initiatives in the 2023 budget would be measured and reported. So this is work that just continues to move on. There's so much going on. We didn't want to lose any momentum, and we felt that it would be important for the incoming council to understand that, where things were left was a place that you were all very comfortable with, and that we could continue to then open up discussions from a solid starting spot and get their direction to us. So I'm happy to answer any questions about any of this. And thank you.
Well, thank you, Kim, and the timing is perfect. You would almost think it was planned. All right, council, do we have any questions? Councilor Sauer.
Yes, and I'd like to thank the CEO for this report. I think this is a good summary, and even at our own council, we asked our staff to prepare a briefing book for the new council, because there might be quite a bit of turnover on the council, and well, we know we will have at the Blue Mountains anyway, but I think we all get a lot of training on process, procedure, municipal act, and everything like that. So what we did at the Blue Mountains Council was we said that, staff should prepare a briefing book similar to ministers receive when they take over their portfolios. Now I know at this level, we have a lot more portfolios than just one. So it could be a little overwhelming, but I think in the long run, even though that would take some staff time, that would save a lot of staff time in the long term, because provided the new council members read the book and understand everything in it, there will be far less confusion and questions later on. And so I think there's a lot to digest. I know the county council does quite a bit, and so having a bit of a briefing book on not only process in the municipal act and code of conduct and everything else, But actually on the real things we're doing here for the community would be a good idea to add to this report, so that when the new council comes in, they can be fully informed on all the initiatives that are going forward. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Councillor Soever. I did see that. It's definitely worth a steal. And I would say that clerks, both at county and across all of our member municipalities, I think are working hard to ensure that the orientation that comes to your councils and to this table is as relevant and useful as we could make it. So there's a lot of work going on right now, and I think that's an excellent suggestion. So thank you.
Anyone else? Going once, twice? I'll call the question. All those in favor of the, anyone opposed? That is carried. Thank you very much, Kim. We're going to turn to item 6B, which is our 10-year capital forecast. I think that puts Sue and Mary Lou, or is it just Sue? On deck? Okay, I'm going to look for a mover to put the item on the floor. Moved by Councillor Patterson, seconded by Councillor Burley. Sue, you have the floor.
Pull up a PowerPoint presentation. Okay, thank you. And through you, Mr. Warden. Today we're presenting to you the 10-year projected capital forecast for the county from 2023 to 2032. So I think you were all sort of given a nice paper package of our summary pages, which is just a small piece of our larger package. You'll see a link to in the report. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of items that we've updated within the capital sheets that are provided within the package. You'll see that there is a section for operating impacts added so that staff have identified potential savings and or cost going forward, so that this will allow us to know what to include in future operating budgets. We've also included a section on procurement timing so that this will allow some of our purchasing staff to have a feel for when they can expect RFPs or tenders to be coming into play so that they can make sure everything's happening in a timely fashion. We've included a section for IT consultation so that our IT department can be well aware, if we haven't already talked to them about projects we would like to do in the future so that we don't impede on their work plans. And one of the bigger pieces that we've included this year is climate change considerations. As we all know, we are focusing on that. We have a climate change action plan. And we have included costing where we were able to provide costing. The reality is that it's very hard these days to know, but really we wanted to identify where we could find opportunities for future opportunities for us. So within this report, you will see that this forecast has been a collaborative effort between all departments and all levels of staff. The document attached to the report includes summary sheets as well as individual project sheets for each departmental listed above: corporate services, planning and development, human services, and transportation services. As shown above, and you can see that for 2023, we are projecting the capital needs of $19,582,200, which is $2,048 and $600 higher than the net capital funding in the 2022 approved budget. And this represents a 3.23% levy increase. Included in these totals based on the June 9th asset management plan is a 0.36% levy increase for asset management planning, which was in last year's capital plan of 1.21% and has been increased to 1.57 based on our asset management plan. You'll see in the report that table 2 highlights notable items from the first 3 years of the forecast. And in the next chart, you'll see, I kind of wanted to highlight in the report, you will find that when we went from the 2023 proposed or 2022 proposed projects versus what actually happened was approved in the 2022 capital budget, we actually had a decline in the forecasted versus the budget. So that's why you're seeing a bit more of an increase from the 2000. If we had actually kept what we proposed in 2022 to the 2023, it was really just it's a 0.49% of a levy increase. And the reason the majority of those capital projects were modified from the proposed was due to some operating budgets and to keep the net levy increase to a manageable level. So you will see in this slide, it shows sort of the overall 10-year increased spending over all of our 4 levels, and each sort of color represents one of those 4 functional areas. Transportation is the yellow one at the top, human services is the gray, and then planning is a little bit, and then corporate services at the bottom, which are a little bit harder to see. So you can see in this chart where I've circled the second bar, which is the actual approved 2022 capital budget, is a slight decrease from the column to the left, which was the 2022 proposed capital. And you will see that there is a bit of a spike there in 2026, which is mainly attributed to the expected finalization of the redevelopment of Rockwood Terrace. And then, as I've mentioned before, table 2 in the report highlights notable items in these sort of 3 areas. So they reflect projects that are new, project timing has changed, or significant budget adjustments have been made. Now we'll move more into the forecasted, unless you have any other questions at this time. I'll go into more departmental specifics.
Councillor Silver?
So we just saw in our 2021 financial statements that we were a lot underspent on the capital projects, and some of that was reconciled by moving more money into reserves. And so when we look at the future expenditures and we talk about levy increases, would there not be money in reserves from unspent money from last year that would be available to use on future capital projects, or capital projects that weren't done and are now being planned in the next 10 years?
I'm going to turn to Mary Lou.
You're correct that there is funding in the budgets to deal with some of these projects from reserve, the ones that were carried over. But when you look in the committee report, you'll see that a number of the projects have substantially increased the budget as a result of the supply chain issues and inflation. And if you recall the report that we brought forward that Randy and I worked on the impact on our development charges reserve, that's where it's being seen. So projects are going to cost more money, which is unfortunate.
So okay, so I just want to clarify. So the projected tax increases already factor in the use of those unspent monies that are now in reserves?
Yes, that's correct. As well as for some projects, for example, for Paramedic Services, we transfer money to reserve annually every year so that we don't have huge spikes in the year that we'd have to buy, say, 3 ambulances and 21 DFibs.
I know this council's been through this process a number of times before, but I do want to remind everyone that what staff is providing to you is a proposed 10-year capital. So this is the starting spot. It's the information that we have available to us at the time that we put these numbers together. Things change constantly, and our commitment, I think it's noted in the report, is that we'll continue to update and refresh. And if there's grant money that we can find for something, we're going to go after that with everything that we have. But it's a starting spot. And if the question that we're asking of all of you this morning is, are you supportive of this as a starting spot? Considering that this is what we'll bring to the table, and then bring the operating along with it, and then there'll be an all-in discussion in January. So we want your direction on this side. If you're comfortable with where we are, if you want to see changes at this point, if you want to direct changes to this point, we'll take those back, and that's what will get included in the January budget proposal that comes to council for their consideration. So by all means, ask your questions and make sure that you are comfortable with this as just the preliminary starting spot for capital. Thanks, Sue.
Am I on now? Okay, sorry. So we'll now move into corporate services. So this is the corporate services sort of 10-year projected out plan, which is relatively flat, not a lot of spikes in there. I'm going to, so corporate services has a net levy, proposed levy in 2023 of 1.156 million, which is just a $6,300 change from the proposed budget. You will find that in clerks and council services area that there are no significant changes other than there was the incremental funding for the electronic records management project has been sort of shifted forward because of the report that Jody brought previously to council. There, the ITR-CW-01-22. In the finance area, you will find two sort of different, in 2022, we had proposed a budgeting software, which unfortunately we did have an RFP, which was closed without an award. We have put it back in the budget with an increased cost and ongoing potential operating cost. We've also included starting a transfer reserve for updating our financial software. We have recently become aware that our current financial software will be ending its life. So we will, in the next few years, be looking at our options. And we thought we would start putting some money aside for that. Those are the main changes in those areas. And now I'm going to move it on to the other directors so they can speak to their particular spots. And next we'll go to human resources, and Jennifer Moreau can speak to her forecast.
Good morning, County Council. We have two projects that are within your capital project list for the HR department. One is a noise survey and the other is a workplace violence risk assessment. So I'm just going to explain what a noise survey and a workplace risk assessment is. And if you have questions, please feel free to ask me. So the county as an employer has a duty to take all measures reasonably necessary in the circumstances to protect workers from exposure to hazardous sound levels. The Occupational Health and Safety Act requires that every employer shall ensure that no worker is exposed to a sound level greater than a time-weighted average exposure limit of 85 decibels. And this is measured over an 8-hour workday. We have several departments with a higher risk to noise exposure, and the results of the noise survey ensures that we have the appropriate personal protective equipment to keep our staff safe. Measuring noise within a workplace requires an expert consultant to do this. They use a dosimeter. Staff use noise measurement surveys. They wear them throughout the day, and then we get the results back. We measure that against the personal protective equipment that we have for noise within the workplace and just assure and assess that what we have in place is protecting our staff. Moving on to the workplace violence assessment survey. In Ontario, the Occupational Health and Safety Act requires employers to assess the risks of workplace violence and to put in place policies and programs regarding workplace violence and workplace harassment. Employers with a specific high-risk setting are required to complete a risk assessment for the identified hazards in the workplace. In Ontario, we have identified the following work environments as high risk: direct contact with clients, handling cash, working alone or in small numbers, working with unstable or volatile people, working in a community-based setting, working in a mobile workplace, working in high crime areas, securing or protecting valuable goods, and transporting people or goods. The list above represents many of our work environments, and to complete our risk assessments, we will utilize a consultant who is an expert in minimizing workplace violence risk. The intent is to bring a consultant in every 4 or 5 years to conduct the assessment and ensure that we are providing our staff with as much of a risk, sorry, I'm not using the right word, to minimize the risks that we have inherent in our workplace. So those are the 2 projects that we like to complete next year that require capital funding. Does anyone have any questions for me? Okay, thank you.
That sort of, I was going to bring this slide up next so you could kind of see who's coming next. Anyway, so we have Jody McEachran next for IT.
So the IT capital projects that we're including in the 2023 budget are largely the same that we had in the 2022 plan. Most of those projects are life cycle management projects where we plan on replacing network hardware every 5 to 7 years. We come up with that lifespan based on a number of factors such as the industry standards, what the warranty period is when you buy it, and how long the vendor is going to support it. So if we have something running on our network and it's no longer taking security or software updates, it becomes a risk both for failure and for cybersecurity. So that's how we come up with those numbers. We are seeing some increases in our hardware and software costs pretty much across the board. Where possible, we're trying to offset this, either looking at how we have things configured, sort of the choices of what hardware we're using, and if we can, extending the lifespan on that equipment. So for 2023, our projects are, we have $324,000 set aside to redo the phone system. Pretty much every piece of hardware that we're running our phone system with now is going to be end of life next year, and that includes all the hardware on the network and most of the desktop phones. So again, we won't be able to have vendor support or keep those up to date going forward. So that's a project that is pretty important. In 2021, we hired a consultant to give us a technology roadmap around what we should do with corporate telephony, and they provided some good advice. And one of their major recommendations was to take that system and stop maintaining it and hosting it here in our own data center and move it up to the cloud. So IT would be responsible for configuring the software side of it, but we wouldn't own and maintain the hardware anymore, which would take some of the burden off staff and ideally give us a more reliable service. We also have $52,000 that we're setting aside for licensing of our core network hardware. That'll allow us to extend the lifespan by 2 years on that hardware and bring the overall cost of ownership down if we look at it per year. Originally, that was something we bought into for 5 years, and the vendor said that that would be a hard stop, but they've since said they could support it for a few more years. So that is a good thing for us. So that'll now go in 2024, I think. We are also spending around $51,000 to extend the licensing on our firewalls into 2024. So throughout the end of 2021 and through this year, we've brought a few more sites online that need to be protected with a firewall. They're on the network that provides security for anyone who's using internet or accessing resources through staff computers. And so ideally, when we extend the older firewalls, then we'll be able to handle all those replacements sort of in lockstep. So we won't have any issues with different generations of hardware or any hardware that isn't supported any longer. The remaining of our capital budget is just smaller life cycle replacements, such as battery backups and printers. Sorry, and we also have 55,000 set aside to do a full IT security audit. So we've done the last one 4 years. Ideally, we would do some sort of assessment sort of on an annual basis just to track our progress against cybersecurity standards and to look at some of the new systems that we've brought online. Any questions? Are we saving questions to the end?
Councillor Robinson?
Oops, pardon me. Thank you, Mr. Warden. And Jody, thank you for everything that you and your staff do to keep this council up to date with respect to technology and cybersecurity and training. Very much appreciated. So my question, I think, is more out of interest in terms of the incoming council. And I was very delighted to hear that there's going to be attention paid to the phone system. With respect to members of council receiving a cell phone, is there a possibility of somehow integrating a web-based phone system so whereby any voice messages that members of council receive can be translated into an email? I'm just looking at efficiency, functionality, and your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Warden. Essentially, yes. It's something we can do now. If you have a desk phone and you receive a voicemail, that can be translated into an email. It basically sends the audio file to your email, and so you can see it there and hear it. Depending on the system we choose, and we do intend to go to market, some of them allow you to basically take a cell phone and use it as though it's just any other line on your corporate system. So rather than ringing a desk phone, it can go straight to cell phone. I'm not 100% sure how that functionality would work in terms of capturing a voicemail on a cell phone and forwarding it on, but considering you can do it with you know, a basic line on most systems, I'm sure it's something we could look into.
That's Councillor Milne. I believe you had your hand up.
Yes, I did, Mr. Warden. Thank you very much. And thank you, Jody, for your continued attempts to keep most of us up to date technology wise. He's working on it. My question is revolving around the phone system here in the administration building, and it's a perennial thing. We see it every year. It's very expensive. A lot of people now at home have gone away from a landline and just use a cell phone. And at one time that was, you know, unthinkable. Are we getting to that point here in administration where we don't need the landlines anymore? Everyone's going to have a wireless device to communicate.
Again, through you, Mr. Warden, we probably wouldn't do a full switch the way you would see, you know, a regular residential user dropping a landline and picking up a cell phone. I'm pretty sure if we replaced all the phones we have now with cell phones, we would have a higher cost. But then you also need to implement some sort of software, so you have things like an auto attendant, so people can call in and get that phone tree of options, so someone can find what they're looking for corporately. Or, you know, other issues when you have staff complements such as social services in our housing departments, where you have a line that can be answered by multiple staff. You need something called a hunt group. So it goes into one line, it rings multiple phones, and the first person picks it up. So you still need some sort of overarching software to govern that. And again, as I mentioned in the previous question, some of these phone systems now allow you to use your cell phone and incorporate it into those systems, which does save cost, in that those users wouldn't necessarily have to have you know, a headset or a desktop phone. But that's pretty much where that balance is. You know, right now with traditional telephony, you come into the office, you have your desk phone, you're licensed to use it. If you're out of the office, you're probably getting a cell phone too. So with those options, we could pretty much drop the desk phone and just use a cell phone. But again, you still need that governing system on top of it.
Thank you. Anyone else? And we're back to Sue.
Pardon me, administration, which is where you will actually find our climate change initiatives have now been kind of put under general administration. I believe they were sort of under our planning envelope for our budget last year, but we have pulled it out of planning and put it more under general administration. And Randy and Lynn Swanson, our climate change manager, will speak to these.
Thank you. Good morning, County Council. So as Sue mentioned, really what you see reflected in the budget this year is a greater breakdown of investments in climate action. So the envelope was previously in the planning budget, and it's now being moved over into corporate services. So the greater granularity is really just a project by project outline of what we'll be doing to follow up on the direction we were given under Going Green and Gray, the climate change action plan. So whereas last year there was a general climate action implementation fund, this year we've broken it out kind of project by project. Some of the projects that we're proposing for 2023 were initially identified for completion in 2022. Some of them have moved forward due to efficiencies that we found through partnerships. So we're going to be able to achieve the same outcome for a lower cost. It's just going to take a little longer because we're working with other stakeholders. Another thing to note is that the climate action projects identified in corporate services reflect the overall coordination, but certainly you will see climate action, as mentioned earlier, embedded across the budget. So an example would be one of the projects in corporate services around accelerating electric vehicles. That project is specifically around public charging infrastructure. Electric vehicle infrastructure associated with Grey County's own corporate fleet would be reflected elsewhere in the budget. So some of the projects that we've identified that I think particularly are worthy of note, you'll see us advancing nature-based solutions, which is tree planting and naturalization, which was one of the priorities of Going Green and Gray. Again, that accelerating of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Climate change outreach. We know that there's a lot of education and information that needs to be shared across our community. So that's one of the 2023 capital projects. And then from a policy perspective, as directed, we're moving forward with a green development standard. So looking to build things right the first time, and also a greener homes in Gray project, which would be supporting our residents in increasing the efficiency of the properties that they already live in. For our own corporate assets, we're also proposing a corporate climate action project where we would be looking at a roadmap to have our own facilities, our buildings be lower emissions and more efficient to run going forward. So overall, there is a minimal levy impact from this proposed plan. It's only a $1,000 increase from the approved 2022 budget. And we think that it really shows that we're moving forward across the identified climate priorities. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions, anyone? Councillor Milne?
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Under the greener homes in Gray one, is that, I don't want to, and is that the thinner edge of the wedge towards a direct incentive subsidy to homeowners to upgrade their insulation or furnaces or whatever? Is that where that's kind of headed?
Through the chair. Thank you for the question, Councillor Milne. So yes, currently the federal government has launched their Greener Homes program. So certainly the first intent of Greener Homes in Gray is to help our residents maximize that federal program and really kind of get their and our share of that. But what this project would look at is what are the gaps in that program and what are the opportunities for the county to support our residents in having incentives or education or accessing grants from other orders of government.
Don't see anyone else. On the way in, people may have noticed some black tarp on the front lawn. Do you want to maybe talk about that a little bit?
So yes, it's not just garbage bags that someone forgot to pick up. You may recall that earlier this summer, we brought forward a proposal in partnership with Neighborhoods North, a community nonprofit volunteer group, to naturalize the administration building property So this is the first stage in preparing for a planting. So in mid-October, we'll actually be inviting the community to come and help plant a number of trees along 6th Street East to both naturalize the property and provide shading for pedestrians walking up to the building. So it's quite exciting.
There we go. Thank you very much. Back to Sue. Sue, you're going to get your miles today. Yep.
Next and last little functional area under corporate services is our property administration building, and we'll turn it over to Anne Marie Shaw.
Good morning, County Council. We have 2 projects this year or next year for the administration building. When we originally added on the addition, we put in a carrier system. That's what's providing all of the HVAC for this area of the building. The older side of the building at that time, there was still life expectancy in the system that we were using. So we did not change it at that time. In order to switch the system over on the other side to the carrier control system, we had originally budgeted $55,000, which would have been for the automation tech that's required and the electrical services. We did go out for bids this year, and after having the on-site with it, we do need to put in a new panel connection to the mechanical room along with some rad valves. Not sure if the rad valves are required, but they are included in this price. If they can reuse the ones that are there now, they will. So that would reduce the price. But that does put an additional $75,000 onto the cost of the job. And that's why we're taking it from this year and putting it into the next year. And the other job is we're just doing some replacing the existing flooring and lighting to allow for an IT workspace into the back IT room. So just making some changes to the existing room. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
The next area you'll see is planning and community development. This is their graph over the next 10 years. So it's relatively flat as well. A little bit of increases along the way. And you can see there are mainly 4 departments within this area. And Scott Taylor will speak to the first 2, and he is joining us virtually today.
Good morning, County Council. Sorry I'm unable to be with you in person today, but thanks for allowing me to connect virtually. The planning department projects are kind of grouped into 2 main headings. First is our sort of core land use planning services, and second is our trails and forestry projects. With respect to the core land use planning projects, the main project in 2023, which is being bumped up from its previous place in 2024, is the archaeological management plan. And these are plans that are being recommended by the province that communities undertake through the provincial policy statement 2020 to identify where our archaeological resources are across the county, and therefore maybe where we should be wary of new development. These are projects that we would work closely with stakeholders on, including local First Nations and Métis peoples in that regard. We did get some great advice on this project based on Bruce County just now undergoing their archaeological management plan. So they've been able to share with us some of the information that they've utilized and the costs that they incurred. As such, it is up a little bit from the previous.
Council, I'm going to suggest that we take a 5 or 10 minute break. It might give us a chance to stretch our legs and as well to figure out the technology. So it is now, I should get the exact time. It's 11:22. Can we come back at 11:30? All right, we're all back together. And Scott's there. Scott, you can hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Perfectly, yes.
Okay, great. Sorry about the technological issues there. I'm not totally sure where I cut out. I'll go very briefly just back to the archaeological management plan, which is our planning project for 2023, which has been bumped for 2024. This project will be working closely with Indigenous stakeholders to look at those areas across the county that might have significant archaeological resources within them. I would note this project is being funded 50% through development charges in that regard. In 2023, we're also looking at allocating $10,000 towards implementing our age-friendly community action plan. This would allow for us to begin working with municipalities and partner groups and possibly applying for funding to implement some of the many recommendations of that plan. As well, we're looking at allocating some money for the surplus lands for affordable housing project, which is part of our housing action plan, which has been supported by the Affordable Housing Task Force. That would just give us the money to start to dig deeper into some potential county or municipal owned sites that might be suitable for future affordable housing projects. Beyond that, we'd be looking at updating the growth management strategy in 2024, which was originally supposed to be a 2023 project. That's sort of the lay of the land for the planning projects. With respect to trails and forestry, we do allocate money each year for major repairs to our bridges and culverts on the CP Rail Trail, so that will continue forward. Going forward, we're also looking at one main project a year, either on the CP Rail Trail or in our county forests. Most of those projects in the coming years are to do with parking improvements to allow people better access to the wonderful natural amenities we have. In 2023, we're looking at improving parking at the CP Rail Trail on the south side of Grey Road 18 at Rockford. This is a key section for the trail because this is where the motorized users either start or end, depending on if you're going from north to south or south to north in that regard. And we'll be working closely with our friends in Transportation Services, similar to what we've done this year at the Collapro project. The only other project of note in 2023 from the CP Rail Trail perspective is we are allocating $25,000 annually to look at surveying costs. We found in recent years that portions of the trail aren't properly registered in the land registry system. So having some money allocated annually will help us get those remaining sections surveyed and properly implemented in land registry. So we'd be working closely with our friends in legal services and the clerk's department in that. So that's the general summary, but I'm certainly happy to take any questions if there's any on the planning or the trails and forestry in that regard.
Thank you very much, Scott. Council, are there any questions, Scott? Seeing none, Sue, I'll turn back to you. Thank you, Scott.
There we go. Thank you. Good morning, Council. Here to talk to you about economic development, tourism, and culture, which would be Grey Roots for our 10-year capital. You'll notice we've done quite a bit of shifting in projects, either bumping them back or pulling them up or rebudgeting based on new BCA figures. So that's why we have so many lines in the notable chart. But the very first one on the list there is the Economic Development, Tourism, and Culture Master Plan. So this is an amalgamation of all three strategic plans into one major document that will help guide our department forward. 90,000 is coming from reserves. That's to do the actual project. The rest is to put into reserves so that we can continue to refresh on a 5-year cycle. Sydenham campus, 2023 is looking like a big year, but some of it's really good news and a lot of it is funded from our federal economic development grant. So 200,000 of that is from FedDev, and that's going towards completion of the Fab Labs. We also have moved up, I should say, the HVAC system. So right now we are really struggling with the HVAC system at Sydenham campus. We are on 26 individual electric heaters You can imagine with hydro costs the way they are, that is not good. It is really impacting our operating budget, where we're now nearing $80,000 a year in operating just for the hydro cost. So we want to make sure that we can fix that. So we're going to be working closely with Linda to try and find a solution that will help us in the long term. But that is really the priority for Sydenham campus in 2023, is addressing those HVAC needs. We've also had a lot of failures in the system this year, where it's already cost us $12,000 just to maintain what we have. So we would like to get rid of that sooner than later. The rest of the changes around Sydenham are all about the BCA and making sure that we've actually got the proper figures in there. So our original BCA was the estimate based on our school board figures, but now that we actually have a BCA for Sydenham, all of the numbers in the 10-year capital reflect those adjustments. On the tourism signage side of things, this is a project that we're bumping back from this year to 2023. We're trying to work through the cycling and trails head signage with our OMG group, the outdoor management group, as well as our municipalities through the cycling and trails master plan. So we have some work to do before we're able to take on that work, which is why we're bumping it back from this year to next year. And that is federally funded as well. 40,000 of it is coming from those funds and the rest from reserve. The tourism vehicle, we're also pushing that back because it's in great shape. It basically sat for 2 years through the pandemic. So we've got some more time that we can get out of it, and we don't want to replace a perfectly good vehicle. So we're starting again to work with Linda and look at what electric options might be there for us down the road, but we'll keep bumping that project back year over year, so long as everything is functioning and we're not starting to flip where we're spending more on maintenance. And thank goodness for Marty, who will be there to tell us when that happens in transportation. On the gray route side of things, the county gallery update, that is our big project. And this is something that we've been budgeting in increments over a 5-year period. What we're recommending through this 10-year capital is we actually join those projects together in hopes that we can find economies of scale, that we're more presentable for grant applications, and that we also have something significant that we can fundraise for. So 2023, we would look to do all of the rest of the planning for the remainder of the gallery. And this is a reminder, this is the big main gallery that is original to the building from 2004. So we're redoing the abundant section this year and then looking to redo the rest of it in 2024 for fabrication, but start the planning next year. So same budget, just squished. The fire alarm system devices, this is a notable one for 2023. We have moved it up from 2029 based on the BCA and recommendations because a lot of these are also original to the building and need to be replaced. We do not want to have lack around our smoke detectors and our monitors and our fire systems. We also, because of the power, not outages, I would say, but the power fluctuations that we experience at Grey Routes, we also get a lot of false alarms. So hoping that through this process, by bumping it up, we can help save some staff time in those 3 a.m. phone calls. And lastly, in the 2023 projects is a new project, which is the fob entry system update. And that is something that we're working on with IT to bring us onto the full system. So we are on a totally separate fob system than the rest of the county buildings. And while all of the buildings are being updated, we'd like to join with that project for those economies of scale again, and to be able to bring us all into consistency with the rest of the buildings. So those are the key projects for next year for our department. Almost all of it is funded from reserve. There is a little bit of taxation where we're putting the dollars away year over year. So that's where the levy impact is, so that we don't have those large scale charges on individual years. But if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you, Savannah. Are there any questions? Savannah, you mentioned BCA several times. It's spelled out in our package, but for the benefit of the public, what is a BCA?
My apologies, building condition assessment. So it tells us what the life cycles look like for all of the different pieces in each of our buildings and where we need to be replacing them. Really, really helpful document. Long read, but really good.
Good, thank you for that. I guess we're back to Sue.
Next, we're going to move into our human services portfolio. As mentioned earlier, you can definitely see the spike here in that 2026 year due to our redevelopment of Rockwood Terrace. And we're going to go a little bit out of order here because Jennifer Cornell, our Director of Long-Term Care, has a prior commitment that she needs to go to. So we'd like her to get to you with her voice before she goes. So she's going to speak to the individual long-term care homes, and then Mary Lou will take over the redevelopment portion of that budget.
Great. Thanks, Sue. Good morning, County Council, and thanks for your flexibility. The Long-Term Care Committee of Management reviewed their respective portion of the forecast through report LTCR CM 14-22. And that capital forecast outlined the submissions of proposed plans and rationale for capital spending over the next 10 years. Before I get into the details for each home, I would just like to thank the executive directors from each home and their teams, and also Marcus and the team from finance. This is a large undertaking, looking at the 10-year capital for 3 large long-term care homes, and I appreciate all of the efforts that went into putting it together. There are several recurring projects that are common to the 3 homes. These are items like high-low beds, resident lifts, and information technology. These items are on a replacement cycle and support resident and staff safety. For Grey Gables, just give you a bit of some context. Grey Gables was constructed in 1998 and is now 24 years old. It seems like it was only yesterday, but it's been 24 years. And so this capital forecast reflects a proposed levy requirement of $305,200, recommending a return to previous funding level, and requires an increase of $111,400 for the 23 for the proposed 10 years. Some projects that I'd just like to highlight for Grey Gables, just of note, is, and of course my pages are slightly out of order, or maybe they're not. So the items I just wanted to highlight are the front doors and the door system. This is a carried over project. During the pandemic, in a number of our projects, we faced some challenges with supplies of materials and also contractors able to do the work. Similarly, with the retaining wall, that's another project that has been moved forward. The air makeup system is a new project, and this was recommended through the building condition assessment document, which also, as Savannah commented, is a extremely useful and helpful document in planning and making sure that we're on top of things. The air makeup system is planned to be funded with Safe Restart money. There have been a couple of projects that have been retimed to align with the hospital build, and those are things like outdoor signage and parking lots, curbs, and guards. It just makes more sense to do all of that together on that one site. For Lee Manor, Lee Manor was constructed in 1973 and had a major renovation and addition between 2004 and 2006. The proposed levy requirement for the Lee Manor 10-year capital is $214,500. And the changes that I'd like to highlight for that plan is items like the floor replacement, where we are spreading out the floor replacement projects over a number of years. The lighting is a new project, and this is an assessment. It's a lighting audit, and it's an assessment so that we can ensure that when we do the upgrade, we're ensuring proper spacing, most efficient lighting to meet the standards, be fiscally responsible, and we'll also be partnering and getting some advice from Linda in terms of any climate implications with that project. And then there are a number of life cycle replacement projects identified in the 10-year capital for Lee Manor, items like washing machines, cameras, floor cleaning machines. Rockwood Terrace, and I'll just get Rockwood Terrace, we always handle just a little bit differently to be sure that we're considering the redevelopment. So the proposed levy requirement for Rockwood Terrace is $145,600, and it maintains the funding that was approved in the 2022 budget. There is a need for us to continue to provide a safe and comfortable environment while balancing the cost to maintain the building. Similar to previous years, funds are provided for windows, flooring, plumbing fixtures, and electrical in the event that replacements are required prior to moving into the new build in 2026. There are very few changes from the previous forecast, and essentially we keep these items as placeholders just to ensure resident safety and staff safety and well-being, while being conscious that the redevelopment is on the horizon. And that's the update for the 3 long-term care homes. Happy to take any questions.
Deputy Warden?
Thank you, Mr. Warden, and just quickly to Jennifer before you dash off, just in the sense of controlling flooding and drainage and stuff. About our week ago, I'm going to say first meeting in August, we had a major flood in our council chambers. If you go to our website to watch it, it was literally running behind our council chambers. And I know that is something that's reoccurring. I just wonder if you're able to address that.
Great, through you, Mr. Warden, and thank you, Councillor McQueen, and apologies for a flood during a council session. So we have reached out again for some external support. There has been ongoing projects to try to mitigate any issues with the groundwater and the lower level. It is challenging. Sometimes the rain is just so significant that the systems we have in place can't take it away fast enough. So we have reached out for an external consultant to provide us some support going forward. We absolutely would like to keep all of our tenants dry all of the time. So again, apologies for that.
For the redevelopment, currently there's a $1,361,000 transfer to reserve, which was the funds that we previously had as a levy requirement to fund the 2 Lee Manor debentures. So as those funds were available, when the debenture was paid off, we transferred the funds to reserve, knowing one day we were going to require those funds for Rockwood Terrace. We are looking at a number of scenarios. So with what committee has approved for long-term care and the assisted living with the Village Square, we're looking at about $109 million build. That's based on the Class D estimate the Colliers provided, which has an accuracy of a plus or minus 20 to 30%. The Class C estimate, we're expecting an update January timeframe, and that will have a cost estimate accuracy of plus or minus 15 to 20%. So this will require a substantial investment. And it's interesting that when we discussed the costs last year in August, the interest rates that were quoted in the report were 2.58%. Yesterday's rate for a 25-year borrow, which would align with the term of the construction subsidy, is 4.58%. So we've got a substantial change in the interest rates, and that will be new to anyone who's borrowing or that saw that the rate had a 75 basis point increase yesterday. So as mentioned, for 2023, you're not seeing a levy increase. And we are looking at ramping up. We will need to increase our transfer to reserve in order to fund whatever the debenture payment is in 2026. So we're going to be working over the next few months once we have a Class C estimate and revising our costing. Colliers has given us some preliminary information on how much they see that we're going to be paying out until it's open in mid-2026. I'll just also mention that we'll be also updating where this falls with the annual repayment limit. So if you'll remember back in 2020, there was a report endorsed by county council that the county's annual debt repayment limit should not exceed 10% of its own source revenue. And that includes any amounts that we borrow internally. And the 2021 ARL showed that we would have about 3.74% used of the legislated capacity, but the legislated capacity is 25%. So this is going to be a busy fall and leading up into the 2023 budget, refining these numbers. So what you're seeing for 2023 is a 0% increase in the transfer to reserve. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mayor New. Council, any questions? Deputy Warden.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Just in general, or sort of a high level of the 10-year capital, I know Grey Gables was put on hold for a period of time until the, whatever, it wasn't canceled, but there's no note of or mention of that. I just wondered if there's a footnote or something to say that, because it wasn't canceled, it was put on hold, right? So I don't know where that falls into a 10-year capital project or plan, but is that something that should be a footnote put in there, in a sense? Because I know that talk at AMO, there was some talk about the government does realize now that they need to up, and this is even for Rockwood Terrace, they need to up the subsidy. That's there. It's fallen way behind the cost of living and all that stuff. And that's something else that needs to be addressed from the provincial government. I know that they've talked, they're having conversations around that as well. So I just wondered if there is some note.
Thank you for the question, and through you, Mr. Warden. In the absence of any specific direction from this council, we have not made any, what's the right word I'm looking for? There's nothing in the 10-year capital at this time specific to further redevelopment at Grey Gables. We are aware of work that's being undertaken by Advantage Ontario and others to work with the province to better reflect the current costs of construction and these projects in the construction funding subsidy and the development grant. And certainly as soon as we have any confirmation of that information, we would be bringing it back to this table and take further direction from you at that time.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Just following up on that, that's good to hear that. And I know that's, as we know, the cost of living is certainly reflected on that. I know that it says in the report that, and we've known this for a bit, that Grey Gables is being converted to behavioral beds as well. Or there's a movement to go toward behavioral beds as well. That's been funded from the province, right? So what's the time frame on that in a sense? So does that reflect in our capital as well in the sense? Obviously, we're getting funding from the province that's going to help support that. But also that does take away regular beds and puts that into behavioral beds. But I don't know if there's any follow-up on that. Sorry.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, I can give a short update on the Behavioral Support Transition Unit. So Grey Gables is a year into having 20 beds running as a pilot for the Behavioral Support Transition Unit. A little shout out to the team. They've done an amazing job to implement a program during a pandemic, which include hiring and training and all sorts of things. And so that pilot, the agreement with the pilot goes until March of 2023. And so we anticipate that we will be hearing from both Ontario Health West as well as the Ministry of Long-Term Care on what the plans are beyond March of 2023 for that pilot program.
Back to you, Mary Lou.
Since I'm standing here, I'll give Sue a break on the steps. We'll turn it over next to Anne Marie.
So next on our list is social services and housing. Social services does have $0 for next year, but we are looking at the construction of a new early on building in Hanover and looking at a new site. The one that we have right now does not meet our AODA requirements for 2025, along with a few other restrictions on the site. We recently had an assessment done of the building's worth, and with the money that we have in reserves currently for that build, we're hoping that it will be cost neutral at this point. We are working with a partner, preliminary talks with a partner in Hanover, and there'll be more information coming shortly on what the plans are for that early on build. Very exciting. For housing, just to give a little background on housing, Grey County, we have 27 apartment buildings and 232 family homes. The homes were built in 50s, 60s, 70s, and early 80s. To determine how we determine what projects get done when, we rely on our building condition assessments, which were recently updated last year. The building condition assessment gives us a projected time of replacement or upgrade, and then staff will assess a project to ensure the timelines are correct. For example, we might have a roof that's projected in 2023, but we look at it and we think maybe we can get a few more years out of it because we have a roof somewhere else that's not doing as well as it should be. So staff go out and assess all of the projects. We also look into ways of increasing energy efficiency whenever we're looking at any of our projects. For costing, the building condition assessments does provide us an estimate, but we also research our current market prices. We reach out to local vendors and we use our current tenders or quotes from this year and last year to determine cost. Erin Whitney, our facilities manager, is attending virtually too in case there's any questions that I'm unable to answer. Just giving you a highlight of some of the housing projects. We have noted in that we do have a few projects that we have had to increase just because of some of the costing either coming in from this year or some of the costs that have been provided by local vendors. Giving an example, we did have a project in 2020 of this year for balcony restoration and railings. We went out for a number of balcony restorations at the same time. This one did come in significantly higher than what we had budgeted. So we are having to relook and we're going to redo the tender. There's a little bit more work there than what we had thought would be. So we're going to go out and have increased our price to reflect that. Air makeups, we have moved up some air makeups to be completed. Most of the air makeups that we have in our buildings are original to the building, so they're in need of being replaced. And there is funding available through the Safe Restart funding that will cover the costs of this. We've also increased the projects to include air anywhere where possible. We are including cooling in our buildings. It would just be in our hallways and common rooms. As a landlord, we are responsible for providing heating, and now with future changes that'll be coming, we'll also be responsible for providing that cooling for our tenants to ensure that there is a temperature range in our buildings. We have noted that our asphalt prices have gone up, so we've increased the costs to reflect that, along with our window replacements. Windows have gone up significantly. Kitchen baths, we went to a few local market vendors, just recognizing that the cost of cabinets, the plywood has doubled. So we were able to get some local vendors to give us some costs and came up with an idea of what hopefully it will be next year. Again, these are our best estimates based on market prices today. I think that's about all that I have for highlights, and I'd be happy to answer any questions on specific projects.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Scott or Councillor Mackey, my apologies.
No problem. Block to me, Mr. Warden. Thanks, Anne-Marie. Did I understand you correctly that we are going to be mandated to keep our hallways at a certain temperature?
Yeah, that hasn't come out yet, but I'm assuming it will. And quite honestly, our buildings do, especially high rises and ones get quite warm. There were a number of deaths that were associated with a heat wave in Quebec last year. And from that, there's been a lot of rumblings that along with responsibility of heat will come cooling. And for us to go back and have to redo that is a lot more costly than for us to do that now. We have some buildings that just won't be possible in, but with the restart funding, we thought now might be the time for us to be able to do that. So it's not having an impact on our levy, but it is funding that we're able to provide that right now.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. I guess I just wonder how that flies with energy conservation.
Well, I can tell you the systems that we have in right now, our HVACs are from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So we're going to have energy conservation regardless. Even in this building, we had significant reduction in electricity, even with air conditioning. So I'm hoping that it's going to, but for the health of our tenants, I don't think that there's a way that we can say no to that.
Thank you, Councillor Milne. You're next.
Thank you, Mr. Warden, and thank you, Anne Marie. I noticed in the capital projects, there's a number of asphalt reconstructions, redos, whatever you want to call it. Asphalt, of course, generates a lot of heat or retains a lot of heat. I'm wondering, one, how poor does the pavement need to get before we need to, or think we need to replace it? It's not like we're driving down a highway. And the other is, are there greener alternatives? I.e., are there surfaces that allow moisture to get into the, to filter through rather than run off in a storm? And should we not be looking at alternatives to asphalt, if asphalt at all, even? Thank you.
We did have this discussion, believe it or not. Yeah, so they have to get pretty bad in order for us to do. We try and keep that in mind, definitely. But because a lot of our tenants, we were looking at gravel, but because a lot of our tenants have mobility issues and are seniors, that just created a lot of other concerns for us. As for anything else that is around the same price point as asphalt and would probably provide another surface, I'm not aware of anything. Certainly something we can work with Linda for future asphalt, reconstruction, definitely. But I'm not aware of anything right now.
Thank you.
I don't see anyone else, but it's interesting to note how many people are relying on Linda. I think that's it, Anne Marie. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Councillor McQueen.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Just so we have a great deal of cost to upgrade our buildings. Are we able to, I know on the rent side, to try to keep up and you're limited. So are you able to balance out a little bit to help, because you're improving the building, try to get some revenue that sort of offset that other than taxation? Sorry.
So with community housing, our tenants pay 30% of their income. So it's subsidized housing and that is their rent. So there really isn't an opportunity for us to up that. We do have some maximum rents in which we, so a person could be making 30% and get close to that. So what we do is we do have an annual increase that we do provide up to a certain level. So for instance, a person who is an individual living in our housing has to make under $32,000 a year. So our maximum rent could only be 30% of that 32. So that's about all that we can do for that. But what we do is look for any kind of grants, money, loans, anything we can find from the province or any other places.
Great, thank you. I think Sue, you're.
Our last area under Human Services is Paramedic Services, and we'll turn that over to Kevin McNabb.
Morning, County Council. For Paramedic Services, our increase over the 2022 approved budget is $62,500. Some notable changes. The first one being our Chatsworth Paramedic Service Base, which opened in 2019. This is the first year that we're bringing in development charges, so we've seen a reduction in the debenture payments from $65,400 a year down to $14,200 per year. And this base has been debentured over 13 years. Around ambulance replacement, this is probably where we're facing our biggest pressure through COVID. We've ended up with issues with supply chain, so vehicles being delayed and also increases in prices. The vehicles that we ordered in 2022, the spring of this year, we are being told we won't see them until mid 2023. And with that, we had a 28.5% increase in cost. They went from $186,000 to $239,000. We're not sure if that's going to be the ongoing cost or if that's just something we're facing right now. Hopefully we'll know better later this year or early next, but that's something we're going to keep an eye on because with no purchases this year, those two have been pushed through to next, and next year there'll be 4 vehicles purchased, but it'll be nice to see what those vehicles are coming in at again before we move into the next round of tendering. Our vehicles, we have 15 ambulances and we keep them for 6 years. You know, in the budget details, it says 275,000 kilometers, but typically they're over 300,000 kilometers. We get good usage of them. We have entered into a relationship with Great British Health Services where they take our old vehicles and they have expressed intent of taking those vehicles. It helps with their transfer system. And one thing that we built in is around the power load and the power stretchers. And so if they do take those vehicles, we would be using the power load, buying new ones, which normally we get 2 cycles out of them, but they would split the cost of the half of that. So we wouldn't have any losses, but it's a good partnership with the hospital. The next one is cardiac monitor defibrillators. Earlier this year, we did a sole source report, an agreement for a purchase with Zoll Canada, which we've had a long-standing relationship with, and they gave us a really good costing around those defibrillators. And also we were able to take advantage of a 7-year worry-free warranty. Because we received them in 2022, they go down as that we received them this year and they were moved out of the 2023 budget. But part of that agreement is we wouldn't pay for them until 2023. So that still remains the same. And we won't use these defibrillators until probably the last half of December. So we get our full 7 years out of that. And again, we're able to really get some good benefits is around costing, not only in our trade-in, but also the pricing of the units for that. The next one, mobile Wi-Fi and GPS. We use this in our vehicles for computer-aided dispatch, for sending call details, and also we use it for filling out paperwork and forms and call locating. In 2018, we actually worked with the vendor at that time, which was called Interdev. It wasn't really a pilot, but what we want to do is bring it all under one house where they had to look after it. And because we were the only service working with them, they gave us a good deal on moving ahead. Since that time, the company has sold twice. And although the product meets the needs to get us through, but it's never been moved to that level that we need to for our service, we're going to go back, and it doesn't really look like there's much intent with the new company to move this into their new portfolio, is to go back to where the original was, as we would have a separate vendor for that. So that's where you see the increased prices there. But the last purchases, we actually saved money. And we're hoping to do that as far as incorporate it all together, but it just didn't work out the way that we wanted it to. Next is the Paramedic New Durham base, which is to open in open in 2025. And we also moved some funding into 2024 for pre-construction costs. The next one, fob replacements. This is recommended under our building condition assessments and also from IT that the software we have is no longer supported. The system is 11 years old. So we're looking at replacing that across our bases. And heating and cooling at the 1-7 base, it was projected in the BCA to do in 2026, but with safe restart funding, we found it better to capitalize on that and do it in 2023. Any questions at all?
Deputy Warden?
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Thank you for the report, Kevin. Back in March, there was a report or a motion that a report was going to come back on the 10-year plan for, or of all the EMS spaces and stuff. So I just wondered where that report is or where it's coming, when it's coming.
So we have been working hard on that plan, and we're working with ORH out of England, and it's a company that's used across Ontario for this type of review. And it's expected to be, I believe it's October 13th for them to present to County Council this comprehensive deployment 10-year plan. So we're looking forward to that, to see what those recommendations are.
Anyone else? Thank you, Kevin.
Now we'll head into our last area here, which is our transportation services. You will see they have sort of a steady incline over their 10 years, but I will caveat that our asset management plan recommendation increase falls within this portfolio. So that is a portion of that increase as well. In their 10-year transportation services, our director, Pat Hoy, is unavailable today. So he has left council in good hands today. And the major roads and bridge construction, Trevor Ireton will speak to those projects, and the rest will be Jim Nickel will speak to those projects.
All right, good morning, afternoon, County Council, in that transition zone, but I'll try not to hold us up for lunch, so this could be a bit longer than maybe some of the others. So for 2023, our transportation services, construction, resurfacing, and minor capital budget is anticipating a net levy increase of 1.245 million. The majority of this increase is a result of the 1.57% annual levy contribution as part of the asset management plan recommendations supported by this council. This 1.57 increase on the county levy represents 1.026 million, with the remaining 220,000 to be raised directly from an increase in levy. As you're aware, this is a very large package, and a considerable amount of work has been going into preparing a list of these projects contained within the plan each year. This is a living document for us in transportation services, and many of these projects listed in the document are already in various stages of design. Each year, we reevaluate the project list and prioritize projects depending on their rate of deterioration, level of service, and impact on the community, along with a large number of other factors to determine optimal strategies for reconstruction and preventative maintenance. This year, we've been faced with a whole lot of new challenges, such as rapidly rising costs of inflation, supply chain issues, rising fuel costs, large increases in asphalt cement index. These increases are having big effects on our project costs, most of these ranging in between increases of about 15 to 30% in many cases. Some are considerably more depending on the type of construction. So we've worked hard to come up with project cost estimates provided to you as part of this package, and we feel these best represent the current market conditions that we're aware of. For this reason, almost every single job in this package has had an increase in costs compared to last year. There are a few outliers, but most of the time those have been because of a reduction of scope. So as part of the package, we also prepared a transportation capital project map. That map identifies all the road projects within the 10-year plan. I'm not going to go over every single project. But again, if you have questions about a specific one, again, feel free to ask me at the end. So starting with the 2023 projects, We have the Gray Road 3 and 4 roundabout design, which is nearing completion, and the utility relocations are planned for the end of this year. We've also expanded the limits of the work to include some pulverizing and pave work on both the east and west side of Gray Road 3, because that section of road is in poor condition. We also finished the PIC this last summer, and we had a lot of kind of mixed reactions, but a very overwhelmingly in favor of the roundabout, which was good to hear. In 2023, we also have 3 projects on Gray Road 7 in various locations. 2 of the rural projects are located in the south half of Gray Road 7 and include development charges as part of the new development charges bylaw. The projects include platform widening, which is why you'll see a big increase to some of those projects. As part of that work, there'll be new paved shoulders as well as some minor grade changes to promote a safer overall design. The other project on Gray Road 7 is in the town of Meaford near the public school. This project is in partnership with the municipality and will include new storm and water main, as well as an extended urban cross section. The project is currently in the design stages, and we just received a submission actually today. And that will include a new left turn lane for the school as well. Another big project we're excited about next year is Gray Road 18 reconstruction. It's again part of the development charges, so it's going to see platform widening and some grade changes as well. There's some significant fills that we're going to look at addressing. We've also been working closely with the Conservation Authority as there's some grade changes around the Bogner Marsh that are a little more sensitive. So kind of working with them to get a ideal solution for both of us. Through the partnership with the town of Hanover, Gray Road 28 will be reconstructed from Gray Road 4 to the Saugeen River Bridge. We're currently working with the consultant on the design and should include an extended urban section from 10th to 14th Street, as well as paved shoulders north of 14th to the bridge to tie in our paved shoulders north of the bridge. And finally, we have 2 preventative maintenance projects, Gray Road 2 and Gray Road 19. They're both going to receive an overlay treatment. They're perfectly aligned with each other because they connect right to each other, so it can all be done as one project. It'll provide additional structure for the roadway and a much longer lasting surface. And with the increased truck traffic and that around the area, it will definitely improve the structure. I should also mention we have 2 bridge replacements scheduled in 2023. One is on Gray Road 9, just west of Gray Road 23, and the other is on the town line between Meaford and Grey Highlands. That's 2023 in a nutshell. I do want to talk about some of the kind of the bigger projects that are coming down the line, just to give you an idea. One of the major ones is the 19 and 21 roundabout. It's continuing to progress. The utility relocations and the booster station relocation are currently planned for 2023, and we're working with the consultant currently on that. We have also anticipating the completion of the environmental assessment for the Gray Road 19 4-laning project. That should be coming in the next few weeks. And once we have that, we can continue with the design of the 4-laning project and ideally get all these going for the 2024. So if everything falls in line, I'm be happy to get that one going. So there'll also be 3 pulverizing paved projects in 2024. We have Gray Road 9, Gray Road 40, and Gray Road 30. So all 3 of these are also identified as in the new development charges bylaw. So they'll be receiving platform widening as well. So of course, that comes with higher costs for the projects, but again, because of the DCs, it actually is a reduction in levy compared to previous years for. In 2025, we have Gray Road 12, which will be one of the longest projects we've ever completed at the county in a single year. It's going to be platform widening and pulverizing pave from Gray Road 112 west of Meaford, south to Gray Road 40. And then from there, we're doing an overlay treatment on Gray Road 12 from Gray Road 40 to Side Road 4A, which is just northeast of Markdale. So the overall length of that project is 28.8 kilometers. So I'm sure there'll be one happy contractor out there. Gray Road 14 in Southgate and Grey Highlands is also scheduled in 2025 for a Pulverizing Paved. And this road in particular is one that we've seen quite a more rapid rate of deterioration lately. So we've moved it up accordingly. And I believe it was in 27 and 2031 before. So. And then finally, we have a few urban projects in 2026 in the towns of Dundalk, Newstead, Markdale, and also on the west end in Georgian Bluffs here at Nichols Gully. Finally, I do want to also mention one increase we made to our minor capital line. That minor capital budget we increased this year by $100,000, and it's mostly used for a large number of smaller preventative maintenance tasks. These include asphalt patching, grind and paves, steel beam guide rail updates, retaining wall improvements, and a variety of other small things like municipal drain improvements, things like that. These activities really allow us to target localized issues that greatly benefit the overall road network, and it helps to prolong our assets service life by helping avoid some major construction in the future. And with that, we have our recently supported IRIS road condition data, which also helps to really narrow down on those localized issues. So we'll be able to make put that extra money to good use now. That's all I have. So I'm happy to take any questions here. Have any?
Thank you very much, Council. No, you go ahead. You're first.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I think we're happy to see that Pat left us in good hands. You did a great job. My question is we're doing more overlays on existing roads. Does that change our half loads, or could it change our half loads in the wintertime in the sense of certain industries can use it year round for that? Or is that something that we're going to be testing or looking at, or is that part of a plan, or is that possible?
Yes, through you, Warden. Yeah, typically if we can get a second lift on there, most of the time the half loads can usually come off. Again, we still need to look at the supporting understructure of the road, and not always is that there's enough granular material in there, but we'll usually get some sort of study done on a geotechnical, either boreholes or through a falling weight deflectometer. But again, more technical, but yeah, through that we can usually determine, and they'll provide in their report whether it can be reduced or the half load taken away. So
I'm sure our certain industries will be appreciative of that if that's possible, because we do export a lot of different materials and different things. So thank you for that.
Councilor Mackey.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. Thanks very much, Trevor, for the extensive report. Lots of good work going on. A couple of things I wasn't sure if I saw in there. We had a delegation approximately a year ago from a farming community or farming groups back in the Meaford Chatsworth boundary. It had been determined that one of the bridges, there's twin bridges there, one of the bridges met the county criteria. I think we were supposed to get a report back. I'm just wondering what the status of that is and whether it's in the project. That's my first question. The second question is in regards to the increased traffic that we've all seen over the last number of years. Has there been any more thought to the extension of Grey County Road 40 between Highway 6 and 10? Thanks.
sure. So the first question about the bridge, I'm not exactly sure. Randy could probably speak to that.
Through you, Mr. Warden, that report should be coming back for very soon. So Pat and his team will be working on that report. We just had some follow up with some Grey Sauble Conservation Authority, and we got some of that information recently. So we'll be able to bring that report back just to provide an update in terms of where that is at and what are the potential next steps if council wants to explore that further.
And as for the Gray Road 40 extension, again, that's all definitely on Pat's radar. It's a big passion project of his, but at this point, we haven't had really any updates since the last time on that. So again, we have to work kind of with the MTO and likely try to come up with a solution with them to be able to get that to happen, because in terms of a county road extension, it really would make more sense with the highway changing its orientation more than us kind of putting a road in between. But
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Warden and Trevor. Really much, very much appreciate all of the work that's going into this, and certainly all of the attention with regard to our infrastructure to, I guess, keep up to date with the asset management plan. Overall, the IRIS project, I understand, was a pilot project, and that was the software that transportation staff would be able to utilize when they're on the road to determine if there was a specific area of road that needed maintenance as opposed to the full length of the road. Have you determined through your department whether we will continue to use the IRIS software, and is it now off the, I guess, the pilot stage?
Through you, Warden, it's technically still in the pilot stage. We finished all of the driving and basically they're going through the processing portion now. So I meet with them next week and hopefully we'll get, we've seen a few kind of preliminary photos and assessments, but nothing concrete yet to really make a decision on.
Deputy Warden.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Just a high level question, and it goes back to what Councillor Millen was saying earlier on about asphalt. I don't know, from a climate change perspective, is that changing to cement or other sources other than asphalt? Because we know asphalt is a carbon based. You know, I just, as a high level, I just wonder, is that something that there's conversation, chatter about changes to that, or that's that's the norm for many years to come?
That's through you, Warden. Unfortunately, in Canada, we're not far enough. We haven't done enough research and testing. There are other parts of the world, I believe somewhere kind of over in the Middle East, where they've converted to plastic roads and I've been doing pretty successful there. I'm not yet, exactly. My material properties knowledge is not the best, but I suspect it's in the cold climate, it's not great. But that's kind of where we're very limited in terms of just getting solid research, and we just don't have enough infrastructure to really put the research in. So maybe some of the northern states can hopefully drive. I know Michigan and those sort of states definitely tend to do a little more study on this sort of stuff, but yeah, in Canada, it's pretty hard to come across. So.
I don't see anyone else. So, oh, sorry, Councillor Keaveney.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. And that makes me think about the recycled pavement, the Reclamite being one of those products. Is the county looking at going down that road?
Yeah, there has been a lot more talk about that. I know MEA and other organizations are looking at trying to increase the amounts of reused asphalt and stuff in the asphalt itself. So being able to use all of the pulverized material and trying to recycle a lot more of the natural materials within. We also do a lot more Cyrene and recycling on site, that we're trying to promote more of those types of activities again. So trying to use as much material that's already been used and not so much new, or I guess original material is always kind of one of our goals. But again, those depend highly on what's in the road, and it's very much a case-by-case basis. I know another, and even to Councillor McQueen's point, I should also mention there's another potential that I know we've done it before, is using the rubber in our asphalt. They've actually been finding it's becoming much more successful now. So I guess we're kind of the guinea pigs originally, but it's definitely improving as a potential product as well. So there might be more of that in the future, but it'll take a little more convincing, I think, for us than just kind of the way they worked the first time. So.
Okay, I don't see any other hands. So I think you're going to turn it over to your colleague. I forgot his name. Jim, my apologies.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, County Council. I'm here to speak about the equipment and machinery and the facilities and depots. I'll start with the machinery and equipment. The highlights for this year, for 2023, are purchasing 2 diesel tandem trucks. We likely won't see any electric diesels electric tandems until probably 2027. We are running tender for 2 electric half tons. We didn't have any success last year, but we're going to try it again this year. We will be tendering for a electric loader, which is something new. A public works van. And another thing we've decided, our staff have for a few years requested a rubber tired excavator versus the gradle that we've been using. So we're going to try to switch our gradle for a rubber tired excavator this year. Hopefully it's revenue neutral. We get rid of the gradle and get the rubber tired excavator with a few attachments on it. One thing I should mention too is we had mentioned in the fleet report previously about a feasibility study to see what electrical upgrades we need at the maintenance depots and the ambulance depots. That's probably going to go in October. So we get a better idea of the cost for upgrading electrical systems, the generators, and the cost for the chargers. One thing we did add this year was a line for equipment innovation and accessories. So every year we try something different. This year we tried a shoulder spreader, and we'll hopefully get a guide rail mower demonstration. So if the guide rail mower works out, we can reduce our weed spraying and just use a mower on the guide rail. So that's it for fleet. Any questions on the machine?
Councilor Mill.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I noticed the last item there was a purchase of a brush chipper. Is that a conventional chipper that you'd see pulled behind like Hydro One would? I'm wondering, is there any consideration, having known that, is there consideration given now that you're thinking about a rubber tired excavator? You're probably aware in Southgate, we have a brusher head that we attach to our machine to push the brush back on the sides of the roads. Now, I noticed down in 23 this summer, and I'm sure in other places in Southgate, you had a skid steer machine. Works wonderful, but you can't reach all the brush with that machine. And we've seen really good success with our machine to push that brush back to the fence line. Is there any consideration being given to doing something like that?
Sorry, I'm just going to get you to.
Here we go. Okay, so that's one of we've seen the success you've had with your brushing machine, and we've got a lot of ash trees that hopefully can push back and get them into the clear zone without having to cut them, the conventional way of cutting them down. So now we're trying to catch up to the member municipalities and getting a rubber. Yeah, once again. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you. Deputy Warden.
Just to follow up on that, we have the same attachment on our rubber tire, and we also have the brusher in front of the skid steer, which we found 2 things with the attachment on the excavator. People get really upset when you leave half a tree. So when you take it all, don't leave half or whatever. I'm sure you found that as well. But we found last year we purchased the brusher it sort of cleaned up some of those spots where it still leaves the stumps and stuff, where sometimes the 2 machines really work well. So I'm sure you could talk to Chris on that as well.
Yeah. So we're looking forward to trying that for sure. Yeah, we've had really good success with the skid steer. So the next thing is the The facilities and depots. So the first project that we're doing is the removal of the underground storage tanks at Clarksburg. Due to COVID and supply chain issues, we weren't able to do this last year. So we're hoping to do it this year with an early award, get in the queue and get that one done. And with that, the parking lot, once the tanks are removed, they're underground tanks, and we're going to switch them to above ground. And with that, the parking lot will be repaved. The Kimberley sand dome was built in the early 90s. It's a fabric dome. We've been bandaging it together for the last couple of years, so we're going to replace it with a conventional building this year, and it'll hopefully be an early award as well to get in the queue. We've added 3 items for energy conservation from the building condition assessments. The Clarksburg exterior windows, exterior doors, and some LED lighting at Eaton. We've sort of put the new facility at Patrol D on a bit of a pause right now until we find a decent price piece of property. There's property out there, but it doesn't really, it could be larger than we need, so it's more expensive. So we're just putting that on pause. We have added a line for climate change initiatives, so that'll probably, I think that's there to allow our chargers to be installed at the various depots. So that's a thumbnail sketch of the facilities and depots. Any questions on that?
I do not see any. Now back to Sue.
So that brings us sort of to the end of the formal presentation from us. So we'll turn it back over to you, Council, if you have any additional questions you've thought of or have. Like this is.
Oops. Looking around, I do not see any. Oh, Deputy Warden.
So, Mr. Warden, thank you. And just in summary, we're looking at next year, 2023. The roadmap is a roadmap subject to change, or things can change as you go through, but it's a roadmap.
I think you can almost guarantee there's going to be change. That's a certainty. Once again, going once, twice, time to call the question. All those in favor? Oh, sorry, I'm getting a. So once again, call the question. All those in favor? Is there anyone opposed? That is carried. Thank you so much. A lot of work here. We really very much appreciate it. All right, we're going to be taking a break for lunch, and we will come back. Well, let's make it 1:30. That sound fine? 1:30. See you then, Peter. Excellent. Thank you very much. It's 1:30 and we are back. We are now dealing with item C. Let's see, it says 5C, right? 6C, my apologies, 6C, which is the official plan amendment 11 final report. I need a mover to put the item on the floor. Moved by Councillor Robinson, seconded by Councillor Woodbury. Yes.
Mr. Warden, I do have a different motion to put forward at this time as the mover. So I'd like to read it into the record. No, it's not on the floor.
Thank you for that indulgence. Could I ask, is your motion something completely different, or is it amending this, this motion?
Thank you, Mr. Warden. In part, I'm fine with paragraph 1. What I'll do is I'm going to read into the record my motion, because there is a change to it. It doesn't accurately reflect everything in this motion or this recommendation that is put forward in the staff report. So I will put it forward. And
my apologies. I just want to be clear what we're dealing with. Are we dealing with an amending of the motion? Because we do have a motion on the floor. So are you amending it, or are you putting in something completely different? Maybe I'll get you to explain this. Sorry, I think I'm going to let the clerk explain.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Councillor Robinson, if you would like to move your proposed main motion, and then ask the warden to get a seconder for your proposal when you've read it into the record.
thank you.
With the current motion.
So the current motion isn't really on the floor because Councillor Robinson is proposing to move something different. So the seconder isn't quite aware of the motion that she's proposing.
Right, but okay.
Back to this main.
Okay, I'm just give me a quick second. I apologize. I want to make sure I get things right. We have a motion that's been moved and seconded. So I'm concerned about that it's on the floor. I suppose you can withdraw and say, I no longer want to move that, or I'm amending what is on the floor. But I think something brand new would require us to deal with this first and then to deal with something brand new. If it's an amendment, I can allow that. I'll give you a.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak and to have Mike. So as you you called upon me as I had my hand raised to move the motion, and you quickly went to a seconder, and I needed to quickly say I have a motion that I'm bringing forward. As the mover, I did not put in place the staff recommendation. As the mover, I'm putting in place the motion that I'm about to read. So no other motion is on the floor except the one that I'm attempting to put on the floor. Mr. Warden.
Thank you for that clarification. I didn't know that that's what was happening. So I'm still going to say that we have this motion on the floor, because that's what I thought your hand was up for. And we have a seconder for this motion. So let me finish, and then you can challenge if you don't agree with it. What I'm going to suggest is you can withdraw and say, I no longer want to move that motion. And then we can try to deal with something else, but we have to deal with the motion that's on the floor. So that's my ruling. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to either withdraw, and then we can deal with a new motion, or amend the current motion that's on the floor.
So as the mover of the motion, my motion is the one that I'm about to say. You did not give an opportunity for me to say what my motion was. You assumed that it was going to follow this, and then you quickly went to the seconder. And as soon as I was able to have the mic turn red, I clarified right away where my motion was going. So as the mover, I did not move the recommendation contained in the staff report. It's the one that I am attempting to duly put forward as the mover of a motion. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to stick with the ruling that I've made. My ruling is there is a motion on the floor. You can amend it, or you can withdraw, and we'll deal with a new motion. And if you don't like that ruling, you can challenge the chair. Councillor. Oh, sorry.
Thank you for the mic. I do want to say just to my colleagues that my motion, I did not move the recommended motion. The motion that I'm putting forward is the one that I'm about to state. So we did not have a motion on the floor to begin with. And it is the motion that I'm about to make. If that is your motion, then I would, if that is what you're sticking to, Mr. Warden, in your procedure, and I'm not certain whether the clerk has, could I have the clerk's opinion on that first? And then I will address what I need to next. Thank you.
My apologies. I see a few other hands as well. So do we want to deal with this, or should I be dealing with you folks first? Councillor Milne, I saw your hand.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Normal procedure at this table, at least, is staff recommendation is put in front of council. The warden quite rightly asked for a mover and seconder. He thought he had it, but apparently he did not. So what I'm suggesting is I will move support of the staff recommendation as is normal practice.
And Councillor O'Leary.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Just so I'm clear, when you asked for a mover, were you talking about the actual motion that's before us? That's what I thought. So she said yes. Councillor Robinson said yes, she's the mover of that motion that's before us, correct?
There was no other motion to entertain. I asked for a mover in the normal course of things. The motion is presented. We put the item on the floor by asking for a mover and a seconder. Anyone, just one sec, I'll come back to you. I just want to make sure I'm not missing any other hands. Okay, back to you.
So I disagree with your interpretation because when you call an item forward and look for a mover, you need to ensure what the mover is moving in terms of a motion. But in order to facilitate the discussion, which I think is really important, and then perhaps there could be a review of the procedure so that in the event this occurs again, that it's very clear from the individual that is chairing the meeting and also to our county colleagues. I will put an amending motion forward and put that forward at this time, if that is procedurally the way it's being addressed. But I need to make it abundantly clear I'm not in support of the recommendation as presented.
So I just want to be clear. Councillor Milne said that he's moving the staff recommendation, but frankly, I think that's already moved. That's the item that's on the floor. So I don't think you need to say that at all because it's already moved. And hold on, just one sec. And I'm going to allow Councillor Robinson, if she wishes, to present an amending motion, which I think you're proposing. You're proposing an amendment.
Yes, I won't move the main motion as the way it is. So I am not going to be
there. I've been clear already. The main motion is on the floor. That's my ruling. You can amend the main motion, which means you're not supporting it in full, but the main motion is there. You can amend it, or we can vote it down, and then you can present a new motion. Yeah.
Then I am proposing an amendment at this time. All right. Okay, thank you very much. So my amendment is, and I'll read it in full. So the first paragraph is fine, that all written and oral submissions on official plan amendment number 11 were considered and helped to make an informed recommendation and decisions, and that addendum to report PDR-CW-23-2021 be received, and that amendment number 11 to the Grey County official plan be supported with the following paragraph removed. And it is, Although not as directly tied to the GMS, OPA 11 will also include 2 additional future secondary plan areas within the municipality of West Gray, which may be needed to support the future growth of the town of Hanover. These changes were based on the town of Hanover's recent completed comprehensive review and set the stage for future growth planning to meet the needs of the town. And further, that this matter be dealt with at a future county council meeting and only after consultation with and between the local tier municipal members and following the appropriate opportunities for public, stakeholder, and local tier municipal member input. Then I go back to the recommendation that's on the agenda at the stage where it reads, and a bylaw to adopt the county official plan amendment for the balance of the amendments be prepared for consideration by county council. And I will speak to it at the appropriate time. Should there be a seconder for this amendment? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I want to make sure that we are capturing it and that everybody understands the amendment that's being proposed. Council, you have something to say about procedure? Okay, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. Procedurally, we had a motion in front of us that was moved and seconded. Should that not be placed on the floor so that we can have this fruitful discussion in regards to possible changes? And then if county council wants to make changes, we would defeat this motion and then entertain a subsequent motion. But I'm wondering why we're not having discussion on what's being presented in front of us.
Thank you, Councillor Mackey. I think procedurally it is proper to amend a motion. So I'm going to allow the amendment because we do that all the time. We have motions and then somebody says, oh, I want to suggest an amendment, which she is suggesting. And we deal with the amendment. We can vote down the amendment if we don't like it and go back to the main motion. Procedurally, that's how we've been doing it all along. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I guess I would have liked to see the main motion on the floor and had that discussion to know whether or not, you know, there's merit to have an alternate motion. I think we're going about it kind of backwards, but anyway, thank you.
That's a good point. And with that said, what I'm going to suggest that we do, and with your leave, I'm going to suggest that we capture the amendment that's being proposed. Okay. And then before we vote on the amendment, that we actually have the staff presentation, which we would ordinarily have. At the end of that presentation, we will vote on the amendment. If it proceeds, then we'll vote on the main motion. If it's defeated, then we go back to the main motion and vote on that. Is everybody 100% clear about what we're proposing here? So let's capture the amendment, make sure we all understand it, and then we'll have the staff presentation. I thought that's what we were trying to show you there. I was telling you the Queen died. Okay. Perhaps while we're at break, everyone, the whispering is that the Queen has died. Yeah. Or maybe we're going to proceed with the staff presentation, and that'll allow the deputy clerk. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Warden, but do you have a seconder for the amendment?
Okay, so a further change. Because we haven't properly captured it as yet, let's have the staff presentation. We'll come back to the amendment. We'll look for a seconder once we understand it, vote on it, and then vote on the main motion. Everybody understand that? Okay. So staff presentation, who's presenting? Scott, yes. Oh, Scott's online, yes. Scott, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you again, Mr. Warden and members of County Council. Hope everyone had a good lunch. So what we have before us is another report on official plan amendment number 11. And just as a bit of a refresher, official plan amendment number 11 was initiated in July of 2021 based on direction from County Council after Council received the county's updated growth management strategy. Official Plan Amendment number 11 has truly been a team effort. We've had input from Council, we've had input from various task forces and committees associated with Council. We've had input from our municipalities, lots of good feedback from the public, as well as all the staff in the planning department and numerous other departments, including Transportation Services, legal, and the clerk's department. So the primary aim of Official Plan Amendment number 11 was to implement the new population and employment growth projections from the county's 2021 growth management strategy. And the reason this was undertaken in 2020 and 2021 was based on the fact that in 2020, the province changed the provincial policy statement to now allow municipalities and counties to plan for a 25-year planning horizon. As such, the county had to update our numbers such that our member municipalities, in updating their own official plans, could then utilize that option of the 25-year planning horizon in this regard. Throughout this process, we've had an initial information report presented to Council in November 2021. We had a public meeting on February 3rd, 2022, and then we actually had a revised recirculation of Official Plan Amendment number 11 in July of 2022. We did receive a significant number of comments on this amendment, and there's been some materials posted online, including a link in the report to all the comments that were received up until July 2022. So there's a detailed table with a response document that's been available for both Council's viewing, as well as members of the public and municipalities who submitted those comments. Since this report was published late last week, we've had one further comment come in from a planner by the name of Scott Patterson, who provided comments on behalf of the Magwood family. Those comments were shared with County Council and they have been posted on the website. Mr. Patterson did make staff aware that these comments would be coming in a conversation with staff a few weeks ago. So the fact that they were received September 7th just meant that they didn't get included in this report, but they have been posted and certainly reviewed by staff now. There have been a number of changes made to Official Plan Amendment number 11 since the initial incarnation of the amendment in November 2021. This is based on detailed comments from some municipalities and lots of feedback from the public. As I said, those changes were recirculated to all agencies, everybody from the public that had provided comments on the first draft, and people were given a chance to comment again. There were a few other comments received, and those comments were summarized in the staff report that's before you today. Just to go over a few of the key themes of Official Plan official plan amendment number 11. First and foremost, the major thrust of it is to implement the new growth projections for employment and population. When we first completed these growth projections in mid 2021, we didn't have the data yet from the 2021 census. It's been interesting as some of the data releases have come out from the census that the census numbers very closely align with what the consultant had projected for our current population. So that's nice to see that fact checking. I will note that some other municipalities have been undertaking their own growth reviews. Town of Blue Mountains has done one in association with their official plan update, and their consultant came to very similar conclusions. So the fact that we've got multiple consultants agreeing, as well as Statistics Canada, I think it means we're headed in the right direction there. Another key thrust of official plan amendment number 11 is making tweaks to our policies to better support affordable housing and attainable housing in that regard. Official plan amendment number 11 is changing our policies with respect to what we used to call secondary suites. We're now calling them additional residential units in accordance with some changes to the Planning Act. What official plan amendment 11 would do in that regard would be to allow for a secondary suite or an additional residential unit in both the house as well as in a detached accessory structure. So if you like, you could have a house, you could have a basement apartment in that house, and then you could also have, say, a loft above the garage, if you will. This comes about as a result of changes to the Planning Act, which occurred after Recolor Gray, that now mean that municipalities need to be allowing for a minimum of 3 units on site, not just 2 units. There's further changes in the affordable housing policies that better support tiny houses. There's other changes to suggest that the county no longer supports municipal zoning in areas where we have full municipal water, municipal sewer services to only allow for single detached residential dwellings in a zone. So that means as municipalities are updating their zoning bylaws, if this official plan amendment is passed, they would need to consider further housing types in some of the residential zones, including semi-detached or townhouses or apartments in that regard. There's also policies that update our density policies in the primary settlement areas, again, to better encourage the use of alternate housing types beyond just single detached dwellings, to support a positive climate for new apartments and townhouses and dwellings of that ilk. And then finally, there's also some changes to remove the former wording around bonusing, which has been removed as a tool under the Planning Act. With respect to another change that's occurring in the plan, and certainly was the theme of Mr. Patterson's letter on behalf of the Magwood family, the county is including 2 future secondary plan areas in the mapping. And I'm just going to actually share my screen here and walk council through this one, because I think it has generated some confusion here. So just a second. Can council see the map up on the screen right now? Okay, great. So what you have before you is the current schedule showing Hanover, and Hanover is shown primarily in red there, as well as the surrounding municipality of West Gray, which is showing in a mixture of brown, white, and green. And then, of course, you have Bruce County and Brockton to the west showing in gray. What these future secondary plan areas would do would essentially be adding an overlay. And so there's one in the north end of Hanover here on the north side of Railroad 28. And then there's a second one down here in the southeast end of Hanover, which kind of is north of Concession 2 SDR. And just to make it 100% clear, this would not change any municipal boundaries. It would not bring these lands into the settlement area. It would simply add this hatched overlay on top of the rural and agricultural lands to suggest that these might be areas that are needed for future growth. And this is based on both the county's own growth management work, but also based on the significant comprehensive review that was completed by the town of Hanover. That said, the policies that are associated with this future secondary plan area and the mapping that's associated does nothing to change the municipal boundary and does nothing to suggest that the lands in the future will be developed or will be brought into the primary settlement area. Essentially, what would happen is this would flag these lands for future growth purposes. There would need to be future public process. So there would need to be a future county official plan amendment if any of these lands were going to be considered. And of course, there would need to be discussions between the municipalities to determine whether or not the lands would say stay in West Grey and be serviced by Hanover, or whether or not there'd be a municipal boundary adjustment. But none of that is happening at this time. This is just sort of flagging these lands and the need for potential future growth there. There's still a lot of discussions. There's still a lot of public process that would have to occur here. And just for some of the newer members of council, there is some precedent for this. And so this area that you see here, just to the north of the new one that's being proposed, was actually followed a similar path back in 2012, and it was entered into this future secondary plan area. And then Hanover and West Grey worked together a few years later to bring this little red portion that you see in hatched into the primary settlement area, although the land stayed in the municipality of West Grey. So essentially, these two to the north and the southeast are paving the way for those future discussions between municipalities and between landowners, noting, of course, that there will be further public process associated with that should either council choose to move forward in that regard. So with respect to some of the other changes, I should also note on those future secondary plan areas, in the interim, if that overlay is laid on top, all uses in those areas would be allowed to continue. So people that are farming those lands would be allowed to continue farming. People that have houses would, of course, be allowed to continue with their residential uses. Again, it's just flagging for future growth. One of the other changes that's occurred in official or proposed to occur in official plan amendment number 11 is with respect to the province's passing of a minister's zoning order for lands on the edge of Dundalk. So this would toe the line of what the province has approved and bring those lands into the primary settlement area of Dundalk in that regard. They would, of course, be in Southgate. There's further changes to the plan that are looking at implementing some of the early directions from Going Green and Grey, our climate change action plan. And Linda, as we heard about in the budget discussions this morning, has been a very, very busy person. And she's not only been supporting a number of departments, but she's been supporting planning and looking at changes that are needed with respect to enshrining our climate change goals into our official plan policy. There's also been a new section 7.14 added, which is including some additional wording on dark skies and suggesting some further direction that municipalities may choose to take in that regard. Interestingly enough, dark skies is the topic we heard absolutely the most about from the public. We received a number of emails and letters demanding, if you will, that the county include stronger policies on dark skies. And so we have made some further changes there to try to strengthen our policies. We made some changes to some of the policies in the agricultural, special agricultural, and rural designations. Some of these were as a result of direction from the county's own agricultural advisory committee with respect to trying to preserve old bank barns. Other changes were with respect to some requests we heard from farmers to look at the need for more flexible on-farm business policies around some of our smaller farms across the county. We've also clarified the rural lot density policies based on a local planning appeal tribunal decision we got last year. And then we've clarified some of the county's policies around the bedrock and shale policy and the mapping we have in our plan in that regard. Finally, there was a number of housekeeping changes whereby we had some policies that were maybe ambiguously worded, or we needed to add a definition, or there were some mapping changes. Some of those mapping changes are as simple as somebody used to have a gravel pit. That pit has now been rehabilitated and the license has been surrendered to the ministry, and therefore there's no need to identify a gravel pit on the mapping anymore. So there's a number of those housekeeping changes. So with that, and with the consultation that's occurred to date, staff are satisfied that the proposed official plan amendment has regard for matters of provincial interest under the Planning Act. It's consistent with the Provincial Policy Statement 2020. It doesn't conflict with the Niagara Escarpment Plan. And it maintains the overall goals and objectives that council set for us through Recolor Gray and the approval in 2019. So with that, staff are recommending that this report be received and that a bylaw be prepared for County Council on September 22nd for their consideration. So that's my presentation. Certainly happy to answer any questions if there are any at this time.
Thank you very much for that, Scott. There are questions. Councillor Mackey.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. Thanks very much, Scott, for your report. Just a couple of clarifications. So one around the secondary plan areas. When you looked at the 25-year growth projections for the rest of the county, were there any other areas that we should be identifying as adding to the potential settlement areas? That's the first question, Mr. Warden. And I just want to be clear that implementing this today is not handcuffing either the municipality of West Grey or Hanover in their future negotiations. I do believe that, growth in that section of the county is important for residents. Most residents don't care about municipal boundaries. They care about jobs and places to live. But I do believe that individual municipalities need to negotiate a beneficial agreement between both parties, and it shouldn't be the county dictating what that looked like. Those are my thoughts, and if Scott could answer that question, that'd be great, Mr. Warden. Thank you.
Sure, through you, Mr. Warden. Thank you very much for those questions, Councillor Mackey. With respect to your first question on whether or not there's any other areas where we might need future growth outside of our settlement areas. So the growth management strategy identified the 25-year horizon, and it looks at things, if you like, from a 100,000-foot level, and it's up to municipalities now to work with those numbers. Should council support this amendment, to look at whether or not they have the proper allocated land in that regard. The reason staff are recommending the change at this time in West Grey around the boundary of Hanover is because Hanover's already done that deep dive and they've done that comprehensive review. But prior to considering any further changes to settlement area boundaries, unless it was through a minister zoning order, as happened in the Township of Southgate, there needs to be further study done at the municipal level. And so there's not any other future secondary plan areas being proposed at this time. With respect to your other question, maybe I'm sort of a glass half full kind of guy, but I think this mapping and the policy basis in OPA 11, in my opinion, isn't handcuffing either municipality. In fact, hopefully what it's doing is supporting the platform by which those two municipalities could have future discussions and look for some win-win opportunities in that regard. And certainly as county staff, we obviously take our direction from county council, and if county council wants to see staff involved in some of those discussions, obviously we're happy to be there. But staff aren't dictating the discussions in any way. We're simply there to support and simply there to provide evidence, if you will, or background information based on the county's growth management strategy. And so again, similar to what happened in 2012 and then was later implemented in, I think, 2013 or 14, this just provides that basis for those future discussions between West Grey and Hanover there. And if county staff are needing to be involved, then we're happy to avail ourselves in that regard. So I'm not sure if that answers your questions, but if not, I'm happy to clarify further.
If I might, before you have other questions? No? Oh, okay, go ahead then.
No, I just wanted to respond to Scott. No, thank you very much. That answered my question.
Okay, thank you. I just didn't want us to get too far down the road into questions and discussion until we go back to dealing with the amendment, which I think is what we're going to be dealing with. So are we ready to go with that, Madam Clerk? Okay. Okay. If you could clarify it, and then I'll ask for a seconder for the amendment. Yeah.
So Sarah has up on the screen that the, sorry, could you make it a little bigger? That the following, that the report be received and that the following wording be removed Although not as directly tied to the growth management strategy, OPA 11 will also include 2 additional future secondary plan areas within the municipality of West Gray, which may be needed to support the future growth of the town of Hanover. These changes were based on the town of Hanover's recently completed comprehensive review and set the stage for future growth planning to meet the needs of the town, and that this matter be dealt with at a future county council meeting. And only after consultation with and between the local tier municipal members and following the appropriate opportunities for the public stakeholder and local tier municipal member input. And that a bylaw to adopt the county official plan amendment be prepared for consideration by county council. Councillor Robinson, if I could just ask you to confirm that the wording that you like removed is indeed item 7 in the proposed amendment on that table.
Thank you.
Sorry, I apologize. I don't know if I saw a signal coming from Mike. I just want to clarify. No? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. If the item 7 is reflective of the language that it has been read in for the amendment, then that's what I'm looking for. Otherwise, it's specific to the language here. So if both are compatible, and then there's just one other change to the motion, if I might, at the appropriate time, that I read into the record. Yeah, it is a correction. Sorry. Yes. And that is that after and a bylaw to adopt the county official plan amendment for the balance of the amendments be prepared for consideration by county council. Thank you.
Okay. Now I'm looking for a seconder for the motion that you see before you. Councillor Gamble, seconds. All right. So we're going to have, you can have discussion now on the amendment and also on Scott's staff presentation. So whether it's you're speaking to the amendment or you're speaking to the presentation, Councillor Patterson. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Warden Hicks. I have a few comments. I'd like to thank Scott and the planning staff for the work that was put into this. I know amending an OP is a lot of work. It's a big job. With regards to designating 2 future secondary plan areas in West Gray where future growth may occur, this is a designation and not a boundary adjustment, as was emphasized by Scott. Hanover supports the population and the employment forecasts that are included in OPA 11. The town also supports the identification of future secondary plan areas adjacent to Hanover's boundary. With respect to growth, we realize this is only a first step and there is still much work to be done. OPA 11 acknowledges that Hanover does not have sufficient lands to meet the growth projections of Hanover and the growth planning requirements of the provincial policy statement, Grey County, and the province. With OPA 11 in place, it will allow all lower tier municipalities to plan for a 25-year planning horizon using the new residential and employment projections. And it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, growth in lower tiers benefits the entire county. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. And I too would like to commend Scott Taylor for the presentation and the preparing of the report. And I would like to speak to one specific paragraph in reference to OPA 11. The last paragraph in the growth management strategy section is incredibly concerning, and for several reasons, must be removed from the official plan amendment 11 document prior to consideration by County Council and certainly here at Committee of the Whole. I want to be clear that I understand the intent of OPA 11 to address housekeeping matters and provide clarity to accommodate policy matters such as climate change and affordable housing, and to address matters related to growth management strategy. However, the addition of the lands within the municipality of West Grey to identify its potential for future growth is inappropriate in this countywide amendment to the official plan. The consideration of future growth for the town of Hanover is an issue that must be dealt with in a separate matter, and not through a broad-based approach, and certainly not buried within a housekeeping amendment. By definition, housekeeping matters are typically limited to items of clarity. Quite clearly, this addition is not a housekeeping matter, and effectively to isolate one discussion matter for growth should in fact be included in a fulsome report for all of Grey County. The staff report is also very clear that this matter is not even directly tied to the growth management strategy. For that reason alone, this is a matter the county should be considering separately within its own official plan amendment. Transparency and process are imperative to ensure public awareness and understanding of this proposed change. To literally place the matter under the premise of this housekeeping amendment certainly undermines the very goals of collaboration and responsible decision-making. In good faith and in the truest spirit of collaboration, West Grey has been actively participating in discussions focused on growth management. Including this here does not provide the public an opportunity to understand policies and will certainly cause distrust in the entire planning process, which is why I placed the amendment in place for council's consideration. I also would like to identify that West Grey Council also put forward a motion that was circulated to, I believe, the CAO and to the clerk. And it is that Mayor Robinson and Deputy Mayor Hutchinson continue to advocate at Grey County for shared infrastructure servicing agreements and other options to facilitate growth management in Grey County. So there are certainly options when we're looking at growth for Grey County, and certainly that's important, but options also include service agreements. So I would very much appreciate County Council support in this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Body. Sorry, I'm going to cut you off because I see Scott's hand. I suspect he has something to say about the comments. Is that the case, Scott?
Yes, through you, Mr. Warden. I'll keep this brief. Just very briefly, I just wanted to clarify, certainly there was no intent by staff to sneak anything in here or put anything in this amendment without full consultation from municipalities and the public. These pieces were in the amendment that was presented to council in November of 2021, and we have heard feedback on this from the public. We've heard some concerns, as we heard today from Mr. Patterson, and we've heard other members of the public that were in support of these changes in terms of the future secondary plan areas. Councillor Robinson's comments are well taken. These two particular areas, the future secondary plan areas, fell more into the growth management side of things than the pure housekeeping side of things. But I just wanted to clarify that staff have done everything we can to solicit comments on this from everyone from the public to municipalities, including our neighboring municipalities, just to make sure that we got fulsome feedback on this, and knowing, of course, that this is just step one if it's supported, and there'll be future public process and future amendments needed. So I apologize for any confusion, and I apologize if there was any feeling that these were sort of a last minute add-in or aren't appropriate in an amendment of this type.
Thank you, Councillor Body.
Thank you, Warden Hicks. So a question for Mr. Taylor, and he just
basically covered off a big part of my question. So there has been public input. Can you advise if there's any input from Wes Gray on this along the way, given that we've had interim reports, we've taken different steps and heard from the public over the last year or so? Has Wes Gray commented, and what was their comments? Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Warden, we haven't had any formal written comments received from Wes Gray. We have had a few meetings which involved local planners from across the county, and Wes Gray's planner was in those discussions and participated in those discussions. Those weren't just on the future secondary plan areas; those were on the entirety of OPA 11 and the growth management. But to my knowledge, we haven't received any formal written comments from the municipality in that regard.
And if I may then, Warden Hicks, you know, recognizing where growth should be is so important. It certainly falls into what is expected of us from the provincial policy statement to have urban growth in urban settings on urban services, et cetera. And planning ahead is so important as we are looking further and further out towards growth. I also can't help but think about, and I've maybe whined about this before when I've seen subdivisions going in on wells and on septic beds. One in particular that I've whined about, Miles Swan Sound, but there's no school, there's no churches, there's no shopping, there's, you know, people are going to be driving. If we're serious about climate change and we're serious about a climate change action plan, then we're going to have urban style development planned and thought out, and in places where there's urban services and people won't be driving. So to me, it makes sense to proceed with this as proposed by staff. They put a lot of time into it. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, but let's start thinking ahead and planning for those types of things and not limit our opportunities as we go forward, and try and think of it with a climate change. I hate the word lens, but with a climate change lens as we look at this and think about having our urban development where urban services are and close to the municipalities that we have. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking around for other hands. Deputy Warden.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Warden. Just looking at the amendment to the mover of the motion. So can you scroll it up a little bit so I can, yeah, thank you. So it talks about in here that this matter be dealt with at a future county council meeting and that only after consultation with and in between the local tier. I just wondered to council, through you, Mr. Warden, to Councilor Robinson, what kind of timeframes are you looking at, and just to add more detail into what you're asking? Thank you.
Thank you. And I was actually surprised that this item was before us at this late time, as we have certified candidates. We have a October election coming up. So this is really a discussion for the new term of council. And so I feel that that's properly placed. I also want to note that the West Gray municipal staff have been actively participating in discussions regarding servicing agreements even during the pandemic. And also that West Gray has been in discussions with Hanover to find a mutually agreeable solution to resolve growth concerns. And I think that that's still on the table. That discussion should continue at the lower tiers and certainly translate into the new term of council. Thank you.
Councillor Patterson.
I would just like to clarify a couple of points, and I don't like to get into the weeds with the lower tier municipalities, but the last time Hanover met with West Gray was 1 year ago. When we left that meeting, West Gray was to do a growth study and get back to us. I sent a letter in November asking the mayor to respond, and I have not received a letter since. Have not received a letter at all. So the ongoing discussions, there have been 3, one with no result whatsoever. We're waiting on that information.
Councillor Robinson?
Thank you. So there is a small group of appointees from Hanover and also for West Grey to have the discussion. The communique is through staff to staff, and I believe that full communication has taken place, but it's an ongoing discussion. It's a very detailed discussion in terms of whether we'll enter into a service agreements to facilitate growth or any other type of option. Discussions are really important to take place, and certainly I commend staff and our appointees for having those discussions. And it just lends based on what Councillor Patterson has said, that further discussion at the lower tier is imperative. Thank you.
Councillor Patterson?
Apologies, but one final clarification. The staff to staff discussions, we are still waiting on templates for service agreements. There has been very little staff to staff discussions. And again, I apologize, we're in the weeds. This does not belong at County Council.
Councillor Robinson?
Thank you. And those discussions need to continue. To work on the service agreements for those discussions, I think, are really important. And those will take place. So we look forward to additional discussions at the lower tier, where I believe the discussion should be. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Mackey?
Thanks, Mr. Warden. Certainly good to hear the discussion, even though we are bass fishing right now. From what I've heard, both municipalities want the same thing, and that's growth in that one corner. From what I've heard from Scott, this will help facilitate the two municipalities being able to move forward that way. That's what I heard. So I think in order for both West Grey and Hanover to move outside, or whatever the arrangement looks like, requires this amendment to the OPA to increase the settlement area. It's as simple as that. So I'm glad to hear both municipalities, want to work with one another to find a beneficial agreement. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Hutchison?
Thank you, Warden Hicks. And through you to respond to Councillor Patterson, I just want to assure you that the OP portion of what we're working on in West Grey is actually in the hands of the public right now. So we are moving that along. So hopefully when that's completed, we can actually wrap up some of the discussion that you would maybe possibly looking for. But that's where we are with that. So thank you.
Councillor Robinson?
Thank you, Mr. Warden. And certainly a discussion on growth management is really important, but you're seeing that this is the only issue of growth management in this report. And it's put in a very small area, and it's dealing with the area of West Grey and Hanover. No other discussion with any other boundary discussion in the rest of Grey County is discussed. And to have this before us in the report, and I disagree that I think it gives an unfair advantage to have it within an official plan amendment when there isn't the discussion that can facilitate in a balanced fashion at the lower tiers. And I do not agree that this is properly before us in an amending type official plan amendment. There's no other discussion of any other boundary issues here. And I feel that it's unbalanced, that it's only focusing on one area. We don't have, and I just want to identify that it's really important that discussions remain very balanced, and to have this before us there's a lot of power and influence that is being created by having this OPA OPA suggestion in a map that hatch marks future development for Hanover in West Grey lands is highly inappropriate. So although discussions can continue, it's not appropriate that it be at the Grey County level at this time. And I would consider, if my colleagues would think if there's any other
boundary adjustments that potentially would occur in your municipalities. And if there was a small sliver of a discussion in a report and how it may affect your potential boundaries. So that's really important. It's something that I was really not impressed that was included in this report. And although it doesn't handcuff, the very fact that it's here is not appropriate. Thank you.
Madam CAO.
Through you, Mr. Warden. I want to ensure that it's very clear and to reiterate the comments that Director Taylor provided to you, that there is nothing untoward in what's done. There's precedent for this. We have made these sorts of changes in the past without issue. A tremendous amount of work has been undertaken to support the recommendation that's before you this afternoon. And finally, this would only be the very start of a much longer and more detailed and public process that would need to be undertaken before there would be any kind of development taking place or any other further actions. This is simply good planning. We are responsible for ensuring that we have the appropriate lands designated for growth. And in the case of Hanover, the work has been done to demonstrate that they require additional lands. And simply looking at a map would show you that we don't have a lot of other options. The only other direction for Hanover to go is into Bruce County. And because you're crossing a county border, then that process then becomes one that would need to be led by Bruce. And so at this time, I think that what's been done here is tried to the best of our ability to provide a reasonable response to the requirements that we're asked to meet, which is to provide the property available for future growth out to a 25-year time horizon. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Whatsoever first, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. And this discussion brings up a lot of good points. Particularly the CAO's point is we might have to cross a county boundary if we went the other way. And certainly, you know, we recognize county boundaries were drawn over 100 years ago. And I know it's not a favorite topic of people, but perhaps if boundaries reflected how we live today, we wouldn't be here and spending time on this. So, and, you know, you also have to look at perhaps, you know, the time has come to look at how many levels of government we have and whether we should actually, you know, have some major reform so that we're dealing with one level of government rather than two, and that the decisions are made based on how we live today. That being said, that's a lot, and I know it's not a popular discussion, particularly with the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. I have mentioned that to him, and I didn't get a warm and fuzzy response. So but you know, in this case, you know, it is a little concerning to me that, you know, this starts a process, as the CEO rightly pointed out, that, you know, once this is a secondary planned growth area, then you have to start figuring out how you service this. And clearly West Gray does not have any municipal services anywhere close to this. So that would, you know, mean that there would have to be an agreement with Hanover to service lands in West Gray, which means, you know, West Gray will be collecting development charges and then presumably through an agreement providing funding to Hanover to extend its services. So it does set off a whole chain of events that, you know, has financial consequences to West Gray as well as Hanover. And so therefore, I think it would have been preferable that, you know, that whole string of events be worked out before, this gets assigned as a secondary growth area. Because I'm extremely concerned that, in other places, if the county says something is a secondary plan area, when the lower tier amends its official plan, it has to make it conform to the county plan. So it then doesn't have a choice. It has to make it a secondary growth area, whether or not it wants to service that area either itself or through an agreement with a neighboring municipality. But in either case, there are consequences to that lower tier down the road from decisions made at the county level. So, I think, I understand the need for growth in that area and how it makes sense that it be, serviced from Hanover because it's close and, and Hanover needs that, expansion to happen. But on the other hand, as there's separate municipalities with separate tax bases, and this is imposing down the road some financial obligation on West Gray, yet to be determined how that's shared with Hanover. I think, probably the better way is to deal with the servicing first. And so both municipalities are happy with, or equally unhappy, as the case may be, with the, the financial consequences of servicing that area. And then, then put the zoning in place, because it is a secondary growth area. So, it's not, because it's not primary, it's secondary and it's unserviced at this point. I don't think it's a time sensitive matter. So I think hopefully the two municipalities can get together and agree on how it proceeds. But, we are stuck with the governance model that we have of lower tiers, upper tiers, and the responsibilities such as they are, which don't necessarily follow how we live. So, it's not an easy thing. But I do understand Mayor Robinson's concerns, but I also understand Mayor Patterson's concerns with the need for growth. So we are stuck in a system that doesn't really deal with these issues very well. And so it is a tough one.
Thank you. Councilor Robinson, I want to give you the last word since you're the mover, but I'm just going to check and see if there's anybody else that wants to speak, and then I'll come to you last. Okay. Deputy Warden.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. And this is sort of more of a question to Scott. And this is with regards to the Magwood letter. And sort of with the last 3 paragraphs, I guess the 2 questions I have in that map, and maybe the mayor of Hanover or the mayor of West Gray could point it out, but what lands is in question with the Magwood lands or Magwood farms? That's my first question. And number 2 is it's a pretty strongly worded last 3 paragraphs in the letter that, well, it's almost like over my dead body, you're going to get this land, so to speak. And so I guess the question is, what is the role of the landowner in this? And number 2 is it all the lands that were in question, is all Magwood lands, or is it only a portion of the lands?
So I'm going to allow, before I allow Scott, I think the question with respect to what lands are Magwood lands versus other lands is appropriate. I don't know that the other question is necessarily appropriate, commenting on the over my dead body kind of thing. Go ahead, yeah.
So you, Mr. Warden, clarity is what position or rights does the landowner have that all of a sudden you're changing a designation on their land? That's where I'm coming from. I'm coming from an agricultural lens. That's the part I'm coming from.
Sorry. Yeah. So I don't know if it's Scott or Randy that's appropriate for this. Randy? Okay. Okay.
I don't know the exact in terms of makeup of the lands that are currently owned by the Magwoods or identified in the future secondary plan area. I believe it's a portion of the lands. With respect to the question, I think Scott noted this earlier, is that any existing uses that including farmland and other uses the OP policies that are recommended recognize those. And those can continue for ever and a day if that's the choice of the landowner. But also note that from a planning perspective, we can't plan by landowner. We have to plan based on the information of what is before us in terms of what's the most logical location for growth to occur or likely to occur in this case, because again, as Scott noted, these are identifying future secondary plan areas. So these could be areas that could grow. And as Kim noted, it's a first step of a long process in terms of actually designating lands and then zoning lands to be able to actually develop on those properties from a growth perspective. So there's a lot of process that will be ahead. And this is just kind of flagging to say that these are areas that could potentially go. And there's a lot of information, and Council Swever noted in terms of that would have to be explored further in terms of, well, how are these lands going to be serviced? If a portion of these lands could be designated for actual development tomorrow, how are they going to be serviced? And those are long discussions that would have to occur between Town of Hanover and the Municipality of West Grey in terms of how those lands could be serviced as it currently stands in terms of where those lands are currently located. So that's a long-winded answer because I have my head up before, but to try to respond to some of the Councilor Swever's comments, but just to say that from a landowner perspective, it recognizes that those uses can continue for as long as they so wish.
So to follow up that, so from a provincial policy perspective, planning allows to overlay agricultural lands for future growth for that particular reason, but provincial policy also talks about agricultural lands and preserving agricultural lands, but this is an exception to that rule that allows boundary adjustments to happen. Because we hear more that they don't take farmland, they'll take farmland. And we see in Southern Ontario how the best farmland has been gobbled up. So this overrides that in the sense of boundary adjustments in regards to agricultural lands. This is an exception to the rule.
Sorry, to further clarify, there's actually language in the text that actually speaks to some of the matters that you mentioned, Councillor McQueen, in terms of the PPS requirements, and that is in determining the amount of land to be designated for future development. That's again part of the next step. If these lands were even identified as the potential lands, then any future development. Basically the supply and growth within the current town of Hanover, as well as those lands that were currently designated as part of OPA 122, those would have to be exhausted first before any lands were actually designated for growth. So again, this is just an overlay identifying this could be future areas that could be designated for future growth, but there's a lot of process to get to that point and a lot further discussions between the two municipalities as well as the county in terms of to get to that point.
Just one quick sec. I'm going to go to Scott and then I'll come to you, Councillor Patterson. I think we want to be careful. There's nothing, what's before us is not a boundary adjustment. So we got to be careful about using that language. This is not a boundary adjustment proposal at all. Scott, turn to you next.
Thank you, Warden. Just very briefly to Deputy Warden McQueen's question. In this case, the remedy, if anybody that's participated in the OPA 11 process isn't happy with either the policies or the mapping, there is always the possibility that somebody could appeal. So in this case, if the Megwood family chose to or not if they chose to, if they were not happy with the council's decision, should council make a decision on this one, then they could appeal OPA 11. And as the warden noted, I just wanted to again clarify that this is just an overlay, and the underlying designations of the agricultural designation and the rural and the hazard lands would still be in play. So it's sort of like a rural and agricultural with exceptions, if you will, to flag that future secondary plan should that come forward.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Warden Hicks. I too was going to say this is not a boundary adjustment. It is a designation. And Hanover is aware, as is West Grey, that we have a landowner who is not interested in selling or developing. So I'm sure West Gray is well aware of that. We as Hanover, we will continue to respect that in our growth planning decisions, keeping in mind that there are other landowners that want to come into the Hanover area. So it works on both sides.
Sorry, Councillor Robinson, I should have had my mic on.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. It is evident by the discussion here that it's a complex issue. We're not even focusing on any other of the amendments contained here. The idea of assigning a secondary settlement growth area in this type of official plan amendment is very inappropriate. Very little discussion, very little information had been obtained in the report. Certainly there were attachments, but there is not a fulsome report that is dealing with this particular issue. And in addition to that, no other discussion of any other potential growth settlement areas have been identified in the other member municipalities that sit here at Grey County Council. It has been focused on this one area, along with a lot of housekeeping amendments. That, again, I emphasize, is very much inappropriate. There should have been a fulsome report that deals with all the potential growth management strategies for this council, and I feel that it is important that it is a discussion for the incoming council. To just suggest that you're not handcuffing municipalities, or that there's really no impact on the municipalities at this time, I don't feel is a fair statement. If that is correct, the removal of the language in the official plan amendment is very appropriate, which is why I have it before you. The idea of having a balanced report that deals with all of Grey County in growth management strategy is something for consideration of this council, but to put this type of discussion in place on this report is very ineffective and not appropriate. Not all the information is here. The discussion needs to be left with the lower tiers. And you have the amendment before you. It's moved and seconded, and I would ask support from my county colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Just for council's benefit and for clerk staff benefit as well, the amendment that is currently on the floor, we've just changed the wording slightly and looking for your confirmation that this is your intention. The wording that you had put forward is from the staff report. So we've taken that out and are inserting that item 7 of the official plan amendment and item 47 of the official plan amendment, the proposed wording, are struck out so that it removes those future secondary plan areas that you're speaking to. Is that your intention?
Yes, as long as it is reflective of the language that was listed here, and I rely on your professionalism to identify the sections, I would very much support that if that is the case. Thank you.
We'll make the wording and kind of finesse it later, but if that's the intention.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we're ready to call the question on the amendment, and I just want to make sure that, oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Mill.
I call for a recorded vote, please.
Okay, and before we go for that recorded vote, I just want to make sure that everybody's clear about what we're voting on, which is the amended, which is removing the 2 designated areas essentially, right? Councillor Soever.
Mr. Warden, I'd just like to, I have a few other items, but not concerning these sections. Will we have time to discuss those after we vote on the amendment?
Yes, after we vote on the amendment, we will be going back to the main motion either way, either as amended or the original. Okay, Madam Clerk.
Councillor Mackey,
No.
Counselor Mackey is opposed. Counselor Gamble. Counselor Gamble is in favor. Counselor Burley. Counselor Burley is opposed. Counselor Carlton. In favor. Counselor Carlton is in favor. Counselor McQueen. Counselor McQueen is in favor. Counselor Desai is absent. Counselor Patterson. Counselor Patterson is opposed. Warden Hicks.
Nay.
Warden Hicks is opposed. Counselor Clumpus. Counselor Clumpus is opposed. Counselor Keaveney. Counselor Keaveney is in favor. Counselor Body. Counselor Body is opposed. Counselor O'Leary. Counselor O'Leary is opposed. Counselor Woodbury. Counselor Woodbury is opposed. Counselor Milne. Counselor Milne is opposed. Counselor Soever.
In favor.
Counselor Soever is in favor. Counselor Bordignon.
In favor.
Counselor Bordignon is in favor. Counselor Robinson. In favor. Counselor Robinson is in favor. Counselor Hutchinson.
In favor.
Counselor Hutchinson is in favor. That motion was lost 43 to 42.
Oops. Sorry. Thank you. Okay, now we are dealing. Yes, that's what I'm going on. We're dealing with the main motions. I'm going to recognize Counselor Soever first, if you don't mind.
Well, thank you, Mr. Warden, and certainly there are 122 amendments, and there's a lot to digest here. And so, starting at number 1 and jumping right to 97, I want to compliment staff on the addition of the word settlement after our recreational resort area, because there's been a lot of confusion in the town of Blue Mountains, and I'm sure staff have spent a lot of time on the phone with particularly one resident who has had an ongoing discussion with me on that for about 4 years. So the fact that it is now in the official plan as every time it says recreational resort, it says settlement, I think is a nice piece of clarity there. Also like to thank staff for including employee housing as a permitted use in that area. Employee housing has been a big need for all of our businesses, particularly in the mountain area. And number 113, I really appreciate staff putting in there that the county does not support residential zones within a recreational resort settlement area, which only allow for single detached dwellings as the only residential use in the zone. We have a lot of single detached dwellings, and our R1 zone actually in the town of Blue Mountains does not permit anything but single homes. So I guess that means that there's going to be a lot of consternation on that one, but I think it's a very positive thing in that we will get the range of housing types that is mandated by the provincial policy statement. So I guess we will have to look at permitted uses in our R1 zone. Otherwise, we're going to have a very interesting discussion. So presumably, since the county is the approval for plans of subdivision, if a developer comes forward now in the resort, the recreational resort area, with a plan of subdivision that includes only single homes, I guess they'll be turned down. Is that correct, Randy?
Through you, Mr. Warden, and thank you for those comments. And I just want to clarify that that wording is also, we've included as part of primary settlement areas as well. So we'll be looking in terms of trying to provide a mix of housing types within all of our residential zones within our settlement areas, as well as the recreational resort areas. So just wanted to add that particular clarity. With respect to the question regarding plan of subdivisions, it's something that we'll have to work through in terms of process and the nuance. Right now, some municipalities, and as was noted by Council Swever, if they were zoning just by an R1 zone for implementing a plan of subdivision that was just proposing single attached dwellings, then we'd have to look at potentially conformity matters with respect to this policy. But I think that could be easily clarified through exceptions to the zoning until that actual zoning bylaw is updated to add the additional permitted uses. At minimum, the option of adding in at least permitting additional residential units is something that we would definitely encourage. But we hope that it goes beyond just even additional residential units, and that other permitted uses and housing types would be considered within any residential zone within both primary settlement areas and recreation resort areas. And again, it's just to go back to trying to provide those mix of housing options, because as we know, we need a variety of housing options in order to address the housing needs across that housing spectrum. I don't know if Scott has anything further to add.
Thanks, Randy. Through you, Mr. Warden. Thank you for your kind comments, Councillor Soever, and your question. The one other thing I just flag, in addition to what Randy has shared, is that if this change is supported, it may spur some further changes, not only at your zoning level, so at the R1 level, but also in municipal official plans. And so if municipal official plans currently have existing densities for different designations, then sometimes those existing densities, especially if it's phrased as a cap on density, can be a deterrent to people building semi-detached units or townhouse units. So county staff, should this amendment be supported, would love to work with municipalities across the county to look at some of those municipal official plan policies, in addition to any future zoning updates in that regard as well.
Are you done? Thank you. Deputy Warden.
I've switched pages, but I will come back to that. 2 questions. Dark sky lighting. I understand there's exceptions to that, but motion lights and different things, but certainly from public safety and from an agricultural perspective, sometimes you need to light things up to see your properties and that type of thing. My other question is, when I get back to where I was, is with regards to the secondary units, and I'm just trying to pull that page back up. I just wanted to get clarity, and it is underlined both. And this is a question to Scott with regards to both can be detached and also in the unit. So that means you could have a property, basement or above the garage, could be 1 unit. You can also have the secondary unit and a secondary detached unit, which allows 3 is what he was saying. So then that would be then, I certainly support that moving forward. Then the lower tiers would then have to do their housekeeping to it. Because I know that came forward, what, 7, 8 years ago, that they allowed secondary units, but this is going to that next step. And would that still be an exemption, or would that be something with regards to development charges? Because we made that change with development charges with regard to secondary. So I guess that would still be in play because we removed it from the attached, so that wouldn't change anything there. Sounds good.
Sorry, so Scott or Randy, I don't know which one wants to take that.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Warden. Oh, sorry. With respect to Deputy Wardens McQueen's first comments on the dark skies, yeah, there is some stronger policy in there, but there's also some recognition that there are times when, as the Deputy Warden suggested, for safety purposes, or in some cases for federal or provincial regulations, certain types of lighting is still needed. So the attempt through these policies is to look at using dark sky friendly lighting wherever possible, to encourage counties and the county and municipalities to update their own engineering standards, and to try to keep the skies as dark as possible. But yeah, certainly there's recognition that there's times when we do need lighting for various reasons that might not be fully dark sky compliant. With respect to the question on the secondary or the additional residential units, what we used to call secondary suites, You're correct, Deputy Warden. About 7 or 8 years ago, or maybe even as much as 10, I'm losing track of time, the province made a change to the Planning Act to basically tell municipalities, you shall allow for a secondary unit. And at the time when they made that change, it was, you shall allow for a secondary unit either in the dwelling, so maybe a basement apartment, or in a detached structure, so maybe a loft above a detached garage. And so, municipalities across the county had updated their official plans and zoning bylaws to say, yep, you can have one or the other. And then about 2 years ago, the province made a further change to say, no, it's no longer one or the other, it's both. So you shall allow for both. So you can still have different performance standards that determine whether or not a lot is sufficient for that. One of the key ones being parking. So if you need one parking space for each secondary unit, plus the parking for the additional unit, it means that some lots in towns or cities might not be appropriate because they might not have the level of parking needed. But the province has become very aggressive in their tone to make it more of a thou shall. And then with respect to your comments on development charges, I'd have to go back and check the county's development charges bylaw, but I don't think it specifies between one unit or multiple units. I think it's that the accessory units are exempt, but certainly if Deputy CAO Schertzer has anything further on that one, I'd heed to his advice.
Just further to that particular question regarding development charges. So council did approve an amendment to the development charge bylaws, which essentially allows an exemption for additional residential units, creating a maximum of 2 additional dwelling units in or attached to an existing single attached dwelling. So it's in harmony with what the policy changes that we're proposing through OP 11. It's recognizing that can be both in and detached.
Just to follow up that, I think this is the best kept secret out there. I mean, a lot of people don't realize that it's secondary units, but we talk about attainable and portable housing. I think this is a great opportunity for a lot of people in our community to take advantage of. And I don't know how we can promote this, but I think it needs to be promoted. And I think it just, with the exception of your well and septic, if you're rural or if you're in an urban setting and you have to have the parking, there's all those things. But a best guy. But I think this is one of those best kept secrets. And I think we need to promote it, Mr. Ward.
Thank you, and I agree. Councillor Keaveney.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. And I wondered if I could ask a question of Scott in relation to some clarity on tiny homes. As we talk about additional dwelling units and we talk about that basement apartment and potentially a loft over a garage, would a tiny home qualify then in place of that garage as an additional unit on that property? And the second part of my question is, we look at available surplus lands for affordable housing, would a tiny home community qualify to be part of that process and perhaps to go on any of those surplus lands?
Through you, Mr. Warden, thank you for those questions, Councillor Keaveney. First off, from my perspective, a tiny home would qualify as an additional residential unit. So let's say you had a dwelling on the property and you wanted a tiny home in the backyard as an additional residential unit, provided it met the building code requirements, then it could certainly be an additional residential unit in that regard. With respect to tiny homes being used as a tool for the surplus municipal lands project, again, we need to make sure that it met building code requirements. The only other requirement in that regard would be we need to make sure that if there was a further outside funding body, so if somebody had gotten a grant, say from CMHC or some other such group, that it met the criteria of the funding in that regard. We're finding that most affordable housing doesn't get built without at least some sort of funding. So as long as it met those criteria and building code, and we could work with municipalities on the zoning, then from my perspective, it would appear appropriate in that regard. And then just taking a step back with respect to Deputy Warden McQueen's comments on secondary or additional residential units being a best kept secret. I agree with those comments, except we really don't want it to be a secret. We want to, as he said, promote it and make people aware of it. Some municipalities are looking at doing that through their municipal community improvement plan programs to offer, say, a small grant if somebody wanted to retrofit a basement or a garage for an accessory unit. So I think collectively between the county and the municipalities, if we can all be spreading the word, then that would be fantastic.
Good point. Anyone else? Is it time to call the question then? Oh, I noticed that Councillor Soever has just stepped out. In any case, I think we called the question. All those in favor of the motion? Anyone opposed? That is carried. Thank you very much. Okay, we are on. Does anyone need a short break, even if just to stand up and stretch? I'm feeling. Let's take just a minute. Stretch it out. Yes. All right. We're on to the last item of the day. Dealing with item 6D. The Gray Sauble Authority proposed fee updates. I think that puts, is it Scott or Randy on deck for this one? You, Scott? Or both? Or Scott? Okay. I need a mover to put the item on the floor. Moved by Councillor Woodbury and seconded by Councillor Bordignon. You're kind of looking at me, so I'll go with you. All right, Scott, you have the floor.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. I'll start with this one off and certainly defer to Randy's expertise if he has any further comments to add. He's authored a number of reports on this topic in the past. So what we have before us is a proposal from Gray Sauble Conservation Authority to update their fees. And more specifically, they're just looking at updating their planning fees. So this would be if you're applying for, say, a plan of subdivision application and you need Gray Sauble's review, it would be a fee paid by the applicant for that, or their permitting fees in this regard. And so Gray Sauble earlier in the summer had sent out a note to municipalities. They had asked for county staff comments back by August 15th, 2022, and we submitted comments in that regard. I would note there is further consultation underway from Gray Sauble. They've invited a number of people to a meeting next Monday to talk about this further. So although we're dealing with a report now, it's not the end of the road here in terms of their consultation. I would further note, just as a bit of background, that Grey County is currently working with all four conservation authorities that have jurisdiction in Grey County. So that's Gray Sauble, Saugeen Valley, Nottawasaga Valley, and the Grand River Conservation Authority on a memorandum of understanding, hopefully one that will suit all four conservation authorities, to really outline the services provided by the conservation authorities and to clarify their roles during the development review process. And I think from an outsider's perspective, someone that doesn't, live and breathe this stuff every day, it can be confusing as to who does what between, say, the county, the municipality, and the conservation authority. And most people understand that the conservation authorities have a direct mandate in natural hazard, but in many cases across Grey County, the conservation authorities also play a role in natural heritage. And so when I say natural heritage, I mean sort of the natural environment or the environmental review. So if we're looking at the impact on a water course or the impact on a woodland, certainly the conservation authorities in Grey would help with that. And most smaller municipalities, the county included, wouldn't have a biologist or an ecologist on staff that's qualified to review some of the detailed reports we get in from the development community in that. So we really do rely on the conservation authority, and there's a certain amount of synergy there because their staff are already out on site looking at the lands for natural hazard purposes. And in many cases, those natural hazards aren't a distinct feature from the natural heritage. So just as an example of that, if you picture a property that's say backing onto the Saugeen River, certainly in portions of the Saugeen River, there would be potential impacts from flooding in the spring if high water bridged over the current high water mark. But then there's also natural heritage elements there. So we think about the fish habitat and the other things. So, by sending Conservation Authority staff person out on site and saying, we want you to look at both, it's really not a lot of additional field work beyond what they're already doing, because they're already looking at the river in that case anyway. So we at the county and a number of our municipalities do rely on the Conservation Authority to kind of wear the two hats there of both the natural hazard and the natural heritage review. So with respect more specifically to what Grace Obel has done is they've hired Watson and Associates to do a bit of a study on what the appropriate planning and permitting fees should be. And as with any study of this sort, one of the first pieces of information that you gather is, what do others do? What fees do other conservation authorities charge? What staffing levels do other conservation authorities have? What fees do municipalities charge in that regard? So they've done a comparative review there. And their philosophy through this review has really been to ensure, almost similar to development charges, that development is paying for itself. So if a developer is proposing a plan of subdivision, the fees that they pay to the Conservation Authority should pay for the staff time and resources needed to review that, such that those developments don't need to be subsidized by further tax levy increases in that regard. And so the fees that are proposed, no doubt in some cases, are higher than their current fees, but they are meant to pay for that cost recovery of those services. They've also noted in the report that they are looking to hire additional staff based on the increased fees, more specifically a planning ecologist in that regard, as well as a regulations officer and an engineer as well, to further support the review of some of the more complex applications which we're seeing. And from a municipal planning and county planning perspective, having additional staff and having properly resourced staff has become more important than ever based on the changes to the Planning Act through Bill 109 and the requirements to have comments and decisions made in a timely fashion. Otherwise, municipalities face having to return their own fees. So certainly having these having our 4 conservation authorities being appropriately staffed is very important there. With respect to county staff's position on this, we submitted comments with some constructive feedback on some nuances of the fees. With respect to the dollar value of the fees, that's really a matter for the Conservation Authority in conjunction with Watson Associates to decide. Just as we wouldn't weigh in if municipality X was changing their fees from $1 to $2, it's not really our place to say so for the conservation authorities either. We've just given some feedback on what we've seen work well and what's been challenging with respect to fees in the past. With respect to if these fee increases aren't supported, as I said, there are some dangers there with respect to Bill 109, or there could be further dangers with respect to needing to increase the levy requirements and or potentially needing to hire additional staff or increase fees at the municipal or county table. So if Grace Obel, for example, isn't able to provide some of the ecological services that we've come to rely on them for, then we've got to fill those gaps elsewhere. And so it could be, hiring a third-party consultant, or it could be having to hire staff at, again, the county or municipal level in that regard. And so staff are sharing this report for council's information purposes, hopefully to help outline to council and the public, some of the roles there with respect to the roles that the Conservation Authority staff play. And we're recommending that this report be shared with municipalities within Grey that have Grace Obel Conservation Authority watershed within their boundaries, as well as sharing the report back to the Conservation Authority. And staff will continue to monitor the review in this regard and take part in further consultation if warranted by the Conservation Authority. So that's the sort of high level summary. And certainly if Randy has anything further to add here, welcome his comments as well.
As usual, Scott's done an excellent job of summarizing the report and outlining some of the matters as it relates to some of the fees and some of the consequences or the risks, so to speak, if other options were to be explored. So great job, Scott.
Now's the time to hit him up for a raise, Scott. Okay, do we have any questions? Councillor Mackey?
Thanks very much, Mr. Warden. And thank you, Scott. Just wondering from your experience, had an interesting situation yesterday at a planning meeting at council where Conservation Authority, I'm not going to name which one, technician went out to a property and thought there was certainly a good envelope for building, and that was what he took back to the Conservation Authority. Then the Conservation Authority took it upon themselves to order an environmental impact study, even after the technician identified a good spot. So I'm just hoping there's not too much, duplication. This poor fellow that was, just trying to build a house ended up spending an additional $13,000 on an environmental impact study when conservation technician had went out and reviewed the property and thought, you could safely build within this one envelope. So, in the report, we're talking about them being the experts in the field. Why can't it stop at them? Why does it, they have to turn it over to an environmental impact study, which is additional cost? And maybe that's not a fair question for Scott or for Randy, but I'd just like your impact or input on what triggers an environmental impact study. Thanks.
Well, it appears that Scott is up to the challenge. So Scott?
Through you, Mr. Warden, thanks for those comments, Councillor Mackey. Obviously, I don't know the specifics of this individual case, so I'll speak in generalities, but there's a few different things that can trigger an environmental impact study. The first would be if there's a mapped environmental feature. So the county official plan maps a number of features, including our provincially significant wetlands, our significant woodlands, significant valley lands. So if somebody is proposing development in one of those features, that can trigger an environmental impact study. But then there's other features that we don't map and we can't map. And so more specifically in that regard, that would be things like endangered or threatened species habitat. So we don't have locations for every species, and some species in terms of animals tend to move. So we can't map that in advance. So one of the roles that the Conservation Authority plays in that regard is to be a partial arbiter, if you will, of whether or not they think it's warranted to do an environmental impact study. And what we often see is it sometimes comes down to a question of scale. So if you're proposing, say, 50 houses via plan of subdivision and there's sensitive environmental features nearby, then most likely county staff and Conservation Authority staff are going to say, yeah, you need an environmental impact study here. However, if it's more of a site-specific thing and somebody's proposing, say, a single house, or they just want to put a detached garage on a lot and maybe there's a woodland nearby, oftentimes what will happen is the Conservation Authority will go out to the site and they'll say, yeah, we know the woodland is mapped there. We know the woodland is there. But if you're just proposing this garage or this house in this location, we think you can get by without an environmental impact study. So if you like, the county mapping is very broad brush, but the Conservation Authority staff are the ones that help interpret that in the field. And I'd say more often than not on those very site-specific bases for more minor development, they identify the building envelope, saving people the need to hire those environmental impact study experts in that regard. Now, in the larger applications, that's more typically where we see an EIS done. Of course, there's exceptions to every rule, but that's generally speaking how we've seen it work over the last number of years with our 4 conservation authorities.
Well, thanks very much, Scott, for that generalized response. I mean, it is helpful. I just think we need to be, when we talk about affordable housing, some of these things that get tacked on and on and on to a person that's trying to build a house is counterproductive to affordable housing. So thanks.
Thank you, sir. Next will be Deputy Warden McQueen.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. 2 things. One on Councillor Mackey, in the sense that I know a number of years back we were going through our zoning and we sort of developed a checklist that sort of can scope it, and then if it needs to be, it can be a scoped EIS, not a full EIS. So I don't know if that's something you can go back to the Conservation Authority, but there's some parameters around, so it's sort of standardized for those going out. I think that's something that they could look at. The other thing I've seen a little bit on side of the NEC development permit is a request for an archaeological study on building sites. And I don't know if that's something that's popping up more at the Conservation Authority, but that is a huge cost. And I don't know, I know we talked a bit about it in the OP11, if more generalizing, but I have seen it. And I asked a question at a commission meeting in July, and they said, well, that's only if it's undisturbed land and maybe valley lands and stuff. But then I'm hearing it's getting more and more prevalent that they're asking for these archaeological studies. So yeah, where does it come to the point where it's a little bit over the top? So I don't know if Scott has a comment on that as well, but it comes to a point where we have all these great ideas, but we can't do them because it's going to cost too much, right? I think that's what Scott's sort of saying as well.
Through you, Mr. Warden, to Deputy Warden McQueen. Thank you for those comments, and similar to Councillor Mackey's comments, yeah, staff are very aware that, every one of these studies that's being funded by a landowner or developer adds to their costs, and in some cases can tip the balance between affordability or non-affordability, or even tip the balance between a project going forward or not going forward. With respect to Deputy Warden McQueen's comments on archaeological assessments, yes, that's something that over the past 15 years, we've seen sort of increased awareness of. It's certainly not something that the Conservation Authority would necessarily weigh in on in many cases. More so it would be at the municipal, county, or as Deputy Warden has mentioned, at the NEC level. There are provincial guidelines on when one's supposed to look at an archaeological assessment. Currently in Grey County, we require them for all new plans of subdivision or condominium, unless the land's already deeply disturbed, and or all new gravel pits and quarries. We haven't gotten to the point in Grey of requiring them at the zoning or consent stage, but there are a number of municipalities across the province, including our friends in Bruce County, that do so. As we spoke about just briefly in the 10-year capital discussion this morning, the big planning project for next year is our archaeological management plan. And what we hope to do through that plan is to really map out where some of those areas in the county are that have high potential for significant archaeological resources. And we want to work with a number of different parties on that. One of the key bodies would probably be our own staff at Grey Roots, in terms of looking through the archives to figure out what might be useful information there, but also with our Indigenous communities. And quite often some of the traditional knowledge held within those communities can help us guide whether or not an archaeological assessment is needed. And if it is needed, it might provide some insight as to what might be found in those sites. The provincial guidelines on archaeological assessments are fairly broad, and they speak to, are you within X number of meters of a waterway? Are you within X number of meters of a major transportation corridor and stuff like that? And what it comes down to, if you apply those guidelines, is that, most of Grey County is within not too far from a waterway or from transportation corridors or various other places. And so we want to, be somewhat liberal in terms of how we interpret those guidelines, but not to the point where, to do anything in the county is going to require a full-on archaeological assessment. So we're hoping that by working through this management plan and working with our Indigenous partners and other knowledge holders like our museums and archivists, that we can further scope some of this to understand when and where some of these archaeological assessments might be required.
Good. Go ahead.
A lot of those have been located probably 100 years ago when the farmers were plowing the fields and came across them and put them in the toolbox in the tractor, and they marked that stuff. And some of that's been recorded as well. I know the Beaver Valley area is very enriched with a lot of artifacts that have been found over the years, but there certainly is areas that have been showing that, but lands that have been farmed have found those stuff, right? So.
Okay, Councillor Milne.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. And at the risk of dragging this out, I know, Scott, it's not lunchtime, but it's perilously close to supper time, so I don't want to hold you up. But I did note in your report that the charge for a minor zoning amendment is proposed to go from $380 to $830, which is a 47% increase. That, in my mind, is not reasonable. So I would hope in your discussions with them, you might point that out to them, that most people wouldn't suggest a 47% increase is reasonable. So if they could maybe scale that back a little bit, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do not see any other hands. Going once, twice. Excellent. So it's time to call the question. All those in favor of the motion to receive, the motion to share it with the Gray Sauble Conservation Authority and with municipalities in the Gray Sauble Conservation Authority watershed. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That is carried. And we have a final, I'm going to say, moved by Councillor Burley, seconded by Councillor Carlton, that we adjourn. All in favor? Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I erred. My apologies. I moved too quickly. Was there any other business? And was there any notices of motion? My apologies. That's my mistake. Okay, we're good. We're adjourned.